Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1. Countdown to Death. I hadn't heard from Eleanor in almost 8 years. Not since she left for Arizona, with nothing but a suitcase, a vague goodbye, and a reputation for dabbling in things best left alone. So when a plain, nondescript package appeared on my front porch, no return address, no postage stamp, just my name, handwritten in faded ink. I should have known it was from her. It was early October, and the sky hung low with bruised clouds. The kind of morning that made the air feel heavy, like something was waiting to fall. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when I saw it sitting outside my door, soaked around the edges from the morning dew. I hesitated. I don't know why, but my hand paused over the doorknob. My dog, Casey, a lazy old golden retriever who never barked at anything, stood rigid at the window. His hackles raised, his eyes, clouded with age, were locked on the box. That should have been my second warning. Still, I opened the door. The box was light, too light. When I shook it, I heard something shift, delicate and metallic. There was no note, just a strip of brittle black tape sealing the flap shut. I carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen table, next to the bowl of half-eaten cereal and unpaid bills. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I peeled the tape back. Inside was a small antique clock. It was heavier than it looked, made of dark brass, with veins of green corrosion creeping along its edges. The glass face was scratched, the kind of wear that only came from decades, maybe centuries, of being handled. There were no hands, no ticking sound, just a digital display tucked beneath the glass, blinking a line of static dashes, like it was waiting for something. There was also a note, just 2 words, scrawled in the same faded handwriting as the box. Look closer. I should have stopped there. I should have walked straight to the dumpster and hurled that cursed thing in with all the force I could muster. But something pulled me in. Maybe it was the nostalgia. Maybe it was the part of me that never stopped wondering what happened to Eleanor. Maybe it was the subtle, almost imperceptible hum coming from the device. A low vibration that seemed to thread through my bones, tugging me forward like a whisper too quiet to hear. So I looked, and just like that, the timer began. The static flickered, cleared, and then numbers appeared in red digital font. 43:18, 2:17, 43 days, 18 hours, 2 minutes, 17 seconds. I stared at it, expecting the numbers to vanish, to glitch, to be some kind of sick joke. But instead, they began to count down, second by second, tick by invisible tick. I reached for my phone, half laughing. All right, Eleanor, very funny. But when I opened my contacts, her number was gone. So was our message history, wiped clean, as if she'd never existed. I called mutual friends. No one had heard from her. A few didn't even remember who she was. By noon, the clock had already ticked down to 43:12, 56:3. I decided to unplug it. There was no cord, no battery compartment, no screws, no way to open it. It just sat there, humming softly, pulsing like a heartbeat. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept the clock in the garage, wrapped in 3 towels, shoved into an old toolbox, and buried under a stack of paint cans. But I could still hear it, that soft rhythmic hum. It crawled into my dreams, if you could call them that. Images of Eleanor standing barefoot in the desert, holding the clock in her hands, staring at me with eyes full of shadows. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched. The next morning, the timer read 42:07:40:1:30. I smashed it, took it into the backyard, and brought down a sledgehammer with everything I had. The glass shattered. The metal casing bent. I swung again and again, until it was no longer a clock, just mangled brass and shattered crystal. I stood there panting, hands blistered, arms trembling. Then I blinked, and it was whole again. No sound, no flash of light, just there, perfectly intact, sitting at my feet like it had never been touched. 42:07:39:55. I didn't scream, not yet. That came later. Instead, I brought it inside and tried to research it. Antique forums, occult threads, obscure subreddits. Nobody had seen anything like it. Until I found one comment, buried deep beneath a thread titled Timepieces That Shouldn't Exist, from a deleted user. If you receive it, don't look. If you look, don't believe. If you believe, don't try to run. Because you can't. It counts for you, and only you. The end is already set. I stopped sleeping. Over the next few days, things began to shift around me. Small at first. My toothbrush was wet, even though I hadn't touched it. The shower curtain was closed when I always left it open. Casey refused to go into the kitchen, growling at empty air. Then came the phone calls. Each night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., my landline would ring. No caller ID, no sound on the other end, just static and breathing, soft, labored, familiar. I unplugged the phone. It kept ringing. The countdown kept ticking. I booked a hotel 2 towns over, packed a bag, left Casey with my neighbor. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I paid in cash, burned the clothes I wore when I opened the package. And yet, when I opened the drawer in the hotel nightstand, the clock was there, still counting, still humming, still watching. I screamed then, threw it out the window, called the front desk, told them someone had broken into my room. But when the manager came up with the key card and a skeptical face, there was no sign of forced entry. No shattered glass on the sidewalk. No strange brass clock anywhere in the room until she left and I turned around and it was on the bed. This time, the numbers read 41:01 and I swear, I saw the seconds skip as if the clock was excited, like it knew I was finally beginning to believe and it wanted me to see what came next. I left the hotel room by dawn, but the feeling didn't leave me. It clung to my skin like the damp mist that rolled through the empty parking lot, soaking into my clothes, weighing down my breath. I didn't even bother checking out. I just walked, fast and shaky, toward the rental car with my eyes darting at every shadow, every flicker of movement behind drawn curtains. The clock stayed behind, or at least, I thought it did. By the time I reached my car and opened the door, it was already sitting in the passenger seat, perfectly upright, timer still ticking. 40:19:26:04. That was the first time I heard it whisper. At first, I thought it was the car radio, some garbled interference. But it wasn't static, and it wasn't in English. It was a voice, soft and hoarse, grasping a string of syllables I couldn't understand. It felt ancient, foreign, like something dug up from beneath the ground. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. The voice wasn't coming from the clock. It was coming from inside me. I drove back to my apartment in a daze, barely remembering the highway or the stoplights. My brain felt like wet cotton, muffled, slow. I kept looking over at the clock, daring it to disappear or shatter or melt into something explainable. But it just sat there, patient, ticking off the seconds like a predator, waiting for me to stop struggling. I threw it in the bathtub the moment I got home and turned the faucet on full blast. The brass casing hissed as the water hit it, steam rising, where the droplets touched. But the clock didn't move, didn't short circuit, didn't drown. It just sat there at the bottom of the tub, blinking numbers, mocking me. 40:07 to 14:57. I locked the bathroom door behind me, not because I thought it would help, but because I needed something to feel in my control. That's when I remembered Eleanor's email. She'd sent me one message years ago, just before she vanished. I'd never opened it. I don't know why. Maybe I was angry. Maybe I was afraid. But now my fingers hovered over the keyboard and I couldn't stop shaking. Inbox. Search. Eleanor V. One result. Subject line. Don't open it. Dated November 3rd, 2017. The same day she disappeared. My heart was pounding as I clicked. If you're reading this, then it's too late for me. But maybe not for you. You'll get the clock eventually. They always pass it to someone. It finds those who are close to death, but don't know it yet. You'll think it's counting down. But that's not what it's doing. It's synchronizing. With you. Every breath. Every decision. Every mistake. Until it knows exactly when to take you. You can't destroy it. You can't outrun it. You can't even give it away. Believe me, I tried. But there's one thing you might be able to do. Find the dead interval. It's the only time it stops counting. It's the only moment it listens. I don't know how long you'll have, but you'll know when it starts. And if you hear the bells, run. But don't run far, because it doesn't want you gone. It wants you close, and it always brings you back. The message ended there. No signature, no sign-off, no second chance. I tried replying, hoping idiotically that maybe she was still alive, that maybe she'd tell me what the hell she meant. But the address bounced back immediately. User not found. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my mind. Dead interval. What did that even mean? I didn't have time to think, because right then, the power in my apartment went out. Not just the lights, everything. The hum of the refrigerator died. The ceiling fan halted mid-spin. Even my phone, which had been fully charged, flickered to black in my hand. And from behind the locked bathroom door, I heard the bells. Low, hollow, not from this world. They didn't ring like church bells. They chimed, slow and deliberate, like a pendulum slicing the air open. 1, 2, 3, then silence. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the hallway wall. I held my breath, prayed the sound was in my head. But then I heard the faucet turn off on its own, and the door handle twisted. Just once. But enough. I didn't sleep that night. I sat curled on the living room couch, flashlight clutched in one hand, a carving knife in the other. The clock didn't come out. It didn't move. But I could feel it, pulsing behind the bathroom door like a second heartbeat in the apartment. The next morning, I packed my things again. Only this time, I didn't run away. I went looking for answers. I drove to Eleanor's old apartment. It was a crumbling yellow brick building near the industrial edge of town. A place she once called my little sanctuary of weird. But when I got there, the entire building had been condemned. a rusted fence wrapped around it like a warning. Black graffiti across the front door read, "Door, you brought it back." But someone had written beneath it in smaller red ink, "The dead interval, 2:16 a.m. Basement. Listen for the gap." I shouldn't have gone inside, but I did. The stairs to the basement creaked under my weight. The air grew colder with each step, the smell of mildew thickening until it tasted metallic, like old coins or blood. At the bottom of the steps, I found a room that had once been used for storage. Empty shelves, a broken mirror, dust that hadn't been disturbed in years, except for one thing, an outline in the dirt, human-shaped, as if someone had lain there for hours, waiting. The clock was already there, sitting on the ground, ticking. 39:22 on, don't know. I didn't bring it, I hadn't touched it, but there it was. I stared at it, frozen, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then the ticking stopped. The numbers froze. 39:22. No movement, no hum, just silence. And then, in that unbearable stillness, I felt it. The gap. A moment of perfect emptiness. No breath, no sound, like the world was holding its breath with me. That's when I heard her voice. Eleanor. She was behind me, or beside me, or maybe inside me. "You only get this once," she whispered. "Ask it the right question. Not when, but why." Then the light bulb above flickered violently and shattered. Darkness rushed in like floodwater, and the countdown began again. 39:21:59 tick. I didn't remember leaving the basement. 1 second, I was standing in that cold, still silence, listening to a voice that didn't belong to the living. And the next, I was in my car on the side of Route 53, headlights still on, the steering wheel gripped tight in my raw hands. The clock sat in the passenger seat again, dry and gleaming as if it had never been submerged, never been smashed. 39:4:12:23. Time had moved. I had no memory of it. I could still feel Eleanor's voice in my ear, repeating the same sentence over and over. Not when, but why. I tried to calm my breathing. The night outside was thick with fog, headlights barely cutting through the gray. There were no other cars, no stars, just the low, suffocating quiet of rural Ohio pressing in on all sides. I drove to the one person I hadn't seen in years. The only one who might have an answer that didn't come from dreams or dead emails. My father. We hadn't spoken since my mother's funeral. Grief had hollowed him out, turned him from a warm, eccentric horologist into a bitter recluse who hadn't left his cabin in 5 years. He used to build clocks back before it consumed him, before time became his obsession instead of his craft. The cabin sat near the edge of an old woods in Millersfield, where the land seemed to swallow everything that stayed too long. I hadn't told him I was coming. I didn't even know if he still lived there, but the light above the porch was on. I climbed the creaking steps, hesitant. Knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Just when I was about to turn away, I heard the bolt slide open from the inside. He looked like a photograph of himself. Faded, yellowing at the edges, eyes too wide for his gaunt face. But those eyes still held a glimmer of recognition. He didn't say hello, just stared at me, then at the clock in my hand, and went pale. "You brought it here," he whispered. "You damn fool. You brought that here." He didn't invite me in, but he didn't shut the door either. I followed him into the cabin. Dust lay thick on every surface except his workbench, where a half-assembled grandfather clock stood surrounded by antique gears and yellowed schematics. I thought they destroyed them all, he said, not looking at me. But of course they didn't. Not the original. That one always comes back. I placed the clock on the table between us. You know what it is. He nodded slowly, shoulders sinking. They called it a Death Keeper. Only 6 were ever made. Commissioned by a group in Europe, sometime in the late 1800s. Cultists, believers in chrono-sacrifice, using time to bargain with death. That sounds like a fairy tale, I said quietly. He turned, eyes flashing. Does that look like a fairy tale to you? The timer blinked at us silently. 39 short order 111. He continued, his voice a gravelly whisper. Each Death Keeper was attuned to a person. It doesn't just count down, it learns. It shapes itself around you, binding to your thread of time. It's not just marking your death, it's making it. Can it be stopped? No. He paused. But it can be bargained with. Once, at the dead interval, and even then, only if it recognizes your blood. I stared at him, chilled to the bone. My blood. He reached beneath his workbench and pulled out a heavy black book, cracked leather cover, sealed with the rusted latches. He undid them slowly, reverently. Inside were sketches, notes, symbols, and a page that made my breath stop, a drawing of the same brass clock, exact in every detail. Underneath it, scribbled in faded ink, was a name, Eleanor Vale. I ran a finger over the page. She had one. She was one, my father murmured. She was chosen. She tried to reject it, but once it marks you, it's like infection. It spreads. I looked up, heart pounding. What do you mean was? He hesitated, then said, She's dead, isn't she? The words hit me harder than I expected. She disappeared, I said. She didn't disappear. His voice cracked. She died. That clock only moves on when it finishes its claim. I stared at the timer. 38, 58, 59, 9, and then something strange happened. The timer skipped. 38, 58, 59, 7, 2 seconds gone. Like the clock was twitching or hungry. My father noticed it too. He grabbed the book and flipped to the back, revealing a diagram of a circle, an alchemical seal etched with strange Latin words and jagged runes. This is the seal of return, he said. It's the only way to open a temporary breach. Not to destroy the clock, but to ask it something. That's what she meant, isn't it? Ask why? He nodded grimly. It never tells you the date to torment you. It tells you because it wants to justify itself. It wants you to understand. You only get one chance. And the seal has to be drawn in blood. I felt cold all over. You mean my blood? No, he said, reaching for a small scalpel. Ours. We worked in silence for the next hour. He cleared the wooden floor in the center of the cabin, brushed away dust and years of loneliness, then drew the circle with trembling hands. The symbols came from memory. His hands moved like he was tracing the shape of an old scar. When it was done, he pricked both our fingers and let the blood drip into the center of the seal. The clock began to hum. The light in the cabin dimmed, and then the countdown stopped. 38:51:04. The world held its breath. Ask it, he whispered, then now. I stepped forward, my voice barely a thread. Why me? The air turned thick, heavy. My lungs seized like I was breathing through water. Then I heard it. Words. Clear. Cruel. Because your death is not the end. It is the doorway for something else. And you were chosen to open it. I staggered back. My father grabbed my arm. What does it mean? But before I could answer, Every candle in the room exploded. The timer resumed. 38 Manfi 103:59. And this time, it was ticking faster. We should have run the moment the candles shattered. But fear has a strange weight to it. It doesn't push you forward. It roots you, plants your feet in place, like you're waiting for the ground to open up beneath you. Because a part of you already knows it will. My father was the first to move. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed the clock, yanked it off the floor like it was a grenade mid-count, and hurled it into the fireplace. I braced for the sound, shattering glass, maybe fire hissing against metal. But instead, the room filled with a long, hollow chime. Not from the clock, not from any place in the house. It came from beneath us. The floorboards trembled as if something ancient had stirred. The fire sputtered out on its own. The room plunged into blackness. And then, the whispers began again. At first, they were everywhere. Above us, behind the walls, beneath the floor. But slowly, they concentrated in one place. The hallway. My father grabbed an old oil lamp from the wall and lit it with shaking hands. Its amber glow revealed a long stretch of hallway I didn't remember being there before. This was a one-floor cabin. He never added a wing, but now a corridor extended deep into the shadows, narrow and impossibly long, flanked by peeling wallpaper and doors that didn't match. Some wood, some rusted metal, one that looked like it had been carved from stone. "The house is shifting," my father whispered. "How?" "It's responding to the clock, to you. It's creating memory space. A threshold." I turned slowly to him. "A threshold for what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, lamp in hand, and said quietly, "It's not the clock we're dealing with anymore. It's the thing behind it." The hallway was suffocating. The deeper we went, the thicker the air became, as if time itself grew heavier with each step. The doors we passed had no numbers, but each one pulsed with an aura I could only describe as familiar. Like a dream I couldn't quite recall. Like something I had forgotten. On purpose, we stopped at the fifth door. The wood was blackened and warped, covered in symbols etched by fingernails or something sharper. And at the center, carved deeply in stained red, was my name. Not just my name, my childhood name. The one no one called me after Mom died. I felt my stomach drop. "Do not open that door," my father said quietly. "If it knows your past, it can use it." But the doorknob was already turning. By itself. The room beyond wasn't empty. It was my bedroom. Not the one I lived in now, but the one from when I was 7. Pink walls, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The bed with the frayed unicorn sheets Mom used to tuck me into. Everything exactly the same, except wrong. There was something in the bed, lying under the covers. I stepped forward, hypnotized. The figure shifted beneath the blanket, and I froze. My breath hitched. I didn't want to see it. I couldn't see it. But then it rolled over, and I stared into my own face. 7-year-old me, pale, hollow-eyed, lips moving without sound. I staggered backward, crashing into my father, who held the clock tightly in his hands. Its timer was still running. 38 and 41, 33:20, tick, tick, tick. "What is this?" I gasped. "It's showing you the first fracture," he whispered. "The moment your thread weakened. Your death isn't just coming. It's been growing, feeding. Since then." I looked back at the bed. The child me was gone. In its place was a hole in the mattress. like something had been sucked down into the fabric of time and left behind nothing but cold. A sound rose from inside the mattress. Breathing, but not human. Something slow, wet, slithering. We slammed the door shut and kept moving down the hall. The sixth door was made of metal, bolted shut from the outside. My father stopped in front of it and exhaled sharply. I locked this one years ago. I looked at him. It was for your mother. I froze. What? She had one too, he said, voice breaking. Her countdown ended in 1999, but the clock didn't leave after she died. It stayed. It tried to bind to you. That's when I hid it. Sealed this room and buried the rest. I didn't know whether to scream or sob. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought it was over. The bolts rattled. Something was moving behind the door. Slow, rhythmic, knock, 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 like a heartbeat with fists. The lamp flickered. The temperature dropped. Then, a voice from behind the door. She asked why too, and she got her answer. Would you like to see it? The doorknob twisted. We ran. The hallway no longer obeyed logic. It curved back in on itself, led us past the same door 3 times. My vision swam. My legs burned, and then, just as I was about to collapse, we found a spiral staircase leading down into blackness. Etched into the wall beside it, in chalky white letters, was a sentence that made my blood turn to ice. Where the first second ends, the truth begins. We descended. Step by step, the sound of the ticking grew louder. The spiral led to a circular chamber. Stone walls, no doors, no windows. In the center sat a massive clock, built into the floor. Its hands were broken, the glass shattered, but beneath it was a second timer. Larger, older, covered in dust. It read, "How's the Rogonos?" and didn't move until I stepped inside the circle. Then it ticked, Sakuku, and the floor opened. I fell, not for seconds, but for what felt like forever. Through memories, through screams, through every moment I had ever forgotten, denied, buried. And then I was standing, not in the chamber, not in my father's house, but in a place outside of time. A field of broken clocks, dozens, hundreds, all ticking, all counting down to someone. Some frozen at 0, some running in reverse, some melting into the soil, and in the middle of them, a figure, tall, dressed in a cloak made of watch straps and gears. No face, no voice, just presence. It raised one hand and pointed at my chest. I looked down. The clock was now inside me. Its digits glowed through my skin. And they weren't counting down anymore. They were counting up. Why? I whispered. Why me? And for the first time, I heard the truth, not in words, but in something deeper, something primal. Because you survived when she didn't. Because you broke the thread. Because death is not what hunts you. It's what you're becoming. Story 2, The Path Painted in Blood. There are some places that look wrong even in daylight, places that seem to breathe out a kind of stillness, too perfect, too deliberate. Like something deeper is hiding beneath it, watching. The abandoned house on Brody Lane was one of those places. I was the last one to climb through the broken slats of the fence that afternoon. It was mid-October, the air crisp enough to make your breath visible, and the kind of gray light blanketing the sky that made shadows disappear, but colors stand out more starkly, like blood. "Come on, Mia," Tyler called back to me, waving. His hand hovered just above the threshold of the back porch, where the faded boards looked ready to give out under his weight. I glanced once more behind me. The street was dead silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of dry leaves scratching against the pavement. Then I turned and followed the others. There were 6 of us: Tyler, Jenna, Marcus, Layla, Sam, and me. We'd all grown up in Kingsbury, Pennsylvania, and we all knew the stories about the Brody Lane house, how the family disappeared in the 90s, how cops found dinner still on the table, but no signs of struggle. Just blood smeared on the upstairs walls in long vertical streaks, like someone had been dragged upward. But the most disturbing rumor was about the backyard. How on certain nights, people claimed to see something glowing on the ground. A path, painted in something dark, something red. I never believed in ghost stories, but I do believe in instinct, and every part of me was screaming to turn back. We entered through the rear door, which hung off its hinges. The inside of the house was exactly what you'd expect. Collapsed ceiling tiles, walls yellowed with age, and something more organic. A rancid smell clung to everything, mildew and rot, but also something coppery underneath it, faint but persistent. Jenna pulled out her phone flashlight. "Guys, this place is disgusting," she muttered, her voice trembling more than she probably meant it to. Sam had already wandered off toward the living room. "Yo, come check this out," he called. His voice echoed weirdly in the hollow space. We followed him into a room with a giant sliding glass door that opened onto the backyard. And there it was, the path. It started just past the cracked stone patio. A narrow line, maybe 3 inches wide, winding like a serpent through the dead grass. It wasn't paint. You could tell instantly. It had sunk into the soil in a way that looked too real, too thick. A deep maroon, nearly black in some places, with flies hovering above the sticky residue. Tyler stepped closer to the glass. "Is that?" "It looks like blood," Layla whispered. And then it moved. I swear on my life, the path twitched, just slightly, like a muscle contracting. Everyone saw it. No one said anything for a long moment. Marcus laughed nervously. "Must be an animal under the grass. Mole or something." But we all knew better. Tyler was the first to open the door. "Come on," he said, trying to sound braver than he looked. "Let's just see where it goes." Jenna grabbed his sleeve. "Don't, please. Let's just take pictures and go. This is messed up." But the moment Tyler's shoe touched the beginning of the path, the wind kicked up out of nowhere, hard enough to slam the door shut behind him with a loud crack. The rest of us froze. He turned around, wide-eyed, and tried to come back, but stopped because the path had changed. Now it was longer, stretching out farther into the woods behind the house, still as bloody, still as straight. And the weirdest part, there was nothing behind him now. The house was gone. We screamed, banged on the glass, but Tyler didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the empty space where the door used to be. And then, almost like he had no other choice, he started walking, 1 foot in front of the other, into the trees, into the dark. I don't know what came over us. Maybe it was panic. Maybe it was something else. But I was the next to step onto the path. And when I did, the backyard vanished for me too. It was like walking through a curtain of mist, except the mist didn't feel like air. It felt like passing through something living. Thick, wet, breathing. The others followed, one by one, until we were all there, 6 of us again, but now in a place that didn't look like Kingsbury anymore. The sky was crimson, bleeding into black at the horizon. The trees were taller, warped, with bark that pulsed faintly like veins. The path beneath our feet glistened, and it whispered. I'm not exaggerating. It whispered in short guttural syllables we couldn't understand, but they slithered up our spines and settled behind our eyes. Marcus turned around. We can't go back, he said flatly. The path. Look. And he was right. Behind us the path had vanished. Not faded. Gone. Only ahead did the blood trail remain, stretching further and further into the twisted forest. We walked. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The trees started to hum, low and mournful. And in the distance, we began to hear voices, soft at first, then louder, laughing, crying, begging. Layla clutched my hand. They're children, she said, trembling. Do you hear them? Some of them are kids. It was true. And that's when we saw the first one. A girl in a white nightgown, standing just off the path. Her skin was translucent, almost bluish, and her eyes were missing. Just black bits we could see through. She opened her mouth, and blood dripped from it as she mouthed something to us. Tyler whispered, Don't stop walking. Don't look away from the path. But the others were already faltering. Sam turned his head toward her, and she smiled. A grotesque, stretching thing. And the trees began to move. They bent down, reached for him. I screamed his name, but the moment his feet left the path, he was gone. Not dragged, not taken, just gone, like he had never existed at all. 5 of us now. The path kept growing, and ahead, in the flickering red twilight, more figures waited, each of them standing beside the path, whispering, watching, reaching. They want us to leave the trail. They want our bodies. And the path. It wants us to walk. Forever. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. After Sam vanished, we kept walking in silence, afraid that even speaking might break something fragile. Some invisible thread keeping us barely tethered to this place, or to ourselves. The path beneath our feet remained slick, still glistening with that impossible sheen, as though it had been freshly drawn. I swear, the blood shimmered more brightly each time one of us looked too long. The forest around us grew darker, tighter. The trees leaned in like they were eavesdropping, and the air smelled thicker with each step, metallic and sour, like copper rot. Layla's hand never left mine. Jenna had stopped crying hours ago, but her face looked hollow, as if grief had sucked everything out of her. Marcus, who always joked too much, hadn't said a single word since Sam disappeared. He just stared straight ahead, clenching his jaw so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Tyler led the way. We hadn't seen another spirit since the girl in the nightgown, but we heard them. All night. The whispers followed us like wind in our ears, sometimes far off, sometimes so close I could feel warm breath at the nape of my neck. But when I turned, always, there was nothing. Around what must have been 3 or 4 in the morning, though time here was meaningless, we reached a clearing. It didn't make sense. One moment we were surrounded by the warped trees, and then suddenly there was a house, not the one on Brody Lane. This one looked newer, but still wrong. It sat in the center of the clearing, like it had been waiting for us. 2 stories. Gray siding, all the windows covered with thick black cloth from the inside. A swing creaked gently on the porch, even though there was no wind. The path led directly to the front steps. We hesitated. We should go around it, Layla said. keep walking. But the path goes through it, Tyler replied. His voice was hoarse, cracked. We leave the path. We die. You saw what happened to Sam. But what if... She started, then stopped. Her breath caught, and her eyes widened. There was someone in the window. A figure stood behind the black cloth on the second floor. Not moving, just there, watching. And then it moved. It reached up with slow, deliberate hands and peeled back the curtain. Just a sliver. Enough to reveal pale face with no features, no eyes, no mouth. Just smooth skin like porcelain. And the unmistakable sensation that it was still smiling somehow. The curtain dropped. I almost turned and ran, but the path was waiting. We stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath us like something alive. Jenna whimpered when the door creaked open on its own, revealing a long, narrow hallway bathed in red light. The walls were covered in peeling floral wallpaper, and flies clung to the ceiling like it was summer. Even though we hadn't felt warm in what felt like days. And the smell, rot, not just decay, something freshly roamed, like meat left out to sweat in the sun, mixed with burning hair. Tyler stepped inside first, then Marcus, then me. The door slammed behind us the moment Layla crossed the threshold, and the path vanished again. But there were stairs. At the far end of the hallway, a narrow staircase wound upward. Each step coated in something slick. Blood? I didn't want to know. But something even stranger was beneath our feet. Carpet. A long, faded runner stretched down the hallway, but it twitched every few seconds, like there was something crawling just beneath it. Tyler avoided stepping on it entirely. I wasn't so lucky. When my foot landed square in the center of it, I felt something move, felt it recoil. Then a low groan filled the hallway, and a soft chuckle echoed from somewhere behind the walls. I yanked my foot back and clung to Layla. "This house is alive," Marcus whispered. We didn't argue. We climbed the stairs. The second floor was worse. Each door, lining the hallway, bore a name etched into the wood in jagged scratches. Tyler, Jenna, Marcus, Layla, Mia. Mine was at the end. None of us moved. The walls pulsed, like a heartbeat, faint but steady. Jenna began to mutter something under her breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe just her name, over and over. That's when Tyler's door creaked open. He didn't even hesitate. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't go in." He turned and looked at me. And for the first time, I noticed something was wrong with his eyes. The whites had started to cloud, just a little, barely visible, but definitely not right. "I have to," he said. I think that's the only way forward." And he walked in. The door slammed shut behind him. We banged on it, screamed, kicked, nothing. Then Marcus's door opened, and then Layla's, and mine. And I knew. This wasn't a house, it was a test. Or maybe a punishment, a prison. Each room tailored, each room watching, waiting. I walked in, and everything went dark. I was in my childhood bedroom, but not exactly. The walls were the same baby blue, the posters still there, but every corner was off. The dolls on the shelf turned their heads when I looked away. My reflection in the mirror moved a beat too late, and the bed, God, the bed, was breathing. I approached it trembling, and there, lying on it, was me. Eyes open, staring, smiling. She reached out and said, "Give it back." I don't remember screaming. I don't remember what happened next. When I woke up, I was lying outside, back on the park. The others were there, except Tyler. We didn't ask what happened in each of our rooms. We couldn't, because ahead, the path had grown again. And far in the distance, beyond the trees, was a town. But something told me it wasn't Kingsbury, and something else told me it never would be again. The sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple mixed with mottled yellow, and the trees behind us had vanished. Just gone, like someone had folded the world inward and forgotten to include them in the next sea. Ahead, the path continued, its blood-red trail now cracked and drying, as if it had aged 100 years in the time we spent in the house. But what really stopped us was the town. It lay just beyond the curve of a hill, nestled in a valley where no valley had been before, a place that shouldn't exist. Wooden rooftops jutted out like broken teeth. Storefronts stood untouched by time, yet not a single sign bore any letters. Just blank wood, smeared occasionally with dark streaks. No names, no numbers, no sound. We stood there for a long while, none of us speaking. The wind didn't blow. The air pressed against our lungs like damp cloth. "I don't like this," Jenna whispered. None of us did, but the path went straight into the town. So we followed. Every step felt heavier, like we were sinking into the skin of something vast and ancient. The sidewalks were made of stone slabs that shifted slightly underfoot, like they'd been laid atop something still moving. And all around us, windows stared like open eyes, hollow, watching. I kept glancing at the others, looking for signs, any sign that I wasn't the only one who felt like we were being expected. Leila's face was pale, lips moving silently like she was counting or praying. Marcus walked stiffly, one hand clenched tight around a jagged piece of broken metal he'd picked up near the edge of the clearing. Jenna kept glancing behind us, as if she was hoping Tyler would catch up. But he wouldn't. He was still in that house, or worse. We passed a diner first, classic chrome siding, but the walls were warped, bloated like they'd been soaked in something. The windows were steamed over, and behind one of them, I saw a smear. No, a handprint, dragging slowly down the glass. "Don't stop," I muttered. "Please, don't look inside." No one argued. At the center of town was a clock tower. It loomed over everything like a watchful parent, except the hands of the clock spun wildly, backwards and forwards, never the same way twice. Beneath it, the path split, for the first time. Two trails of blood. One veered left, deeper into a row of houses, with front doors slightly ajar. The other turned right, into a graveyard, its iron gate hanging off the hinges, and a sign above that had been scratched until only splinters remained. Jenna choked out a bitter laugh. Of course, a graveyard, because this nightmare wasn't cliché enough. I tried to smile, but couldn't find the muscles for it. "Which one?" Marcus stared at both paths. "We can't split up." "No," I said too quickly. "We're not doing that again." The silence that followed hung in the air like a held breath. It felt like the town was waiting for us to choose, like it was testing us again. A soft sound drifted from the right, the faint toll of a bell. Once, twice, 3 times, low, guttural, not mechanical, organic. It sounded like bone striking bone. Leila shuddered. "We go left." We followed the path into the row of houses. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice that the blood trail grew thinner, like whatever force was drawing it was running out. But the dread never left. The first house looked abandoned. Dust-covered furniture, sat behind the cracked glass of the bay window. The door creaked as we passed, but no one touched it. The second house had something painted on the wall beside the front door. A symbol, a circle with 3 slashes through it. Jenna stopped. That wasn't there before. I turned to her. How would you know? She blinked. I don't know. I just do. Before I could ask more, we reached the third house. And that's where it happened. The door was open, the inside dark, and yet something familiar called to me. A smell. Cinnamon. I froze. That scent. It was impossible. My grandmother's house used to smell like that every Thanksgiving. No one else in town made apple cinnamon pie the way she did. I stepped forward without realizing it. Mia, Leila said sharply. No, don't. But I had already crossed the threshold. The inside of the house was mine, not just familiar, identical. My childhood home, down to the crooked photo frame on the hallway wall, except it was bathed in red light. Everything looked soaked in it, like the walls bled memories instead of paint. I walked deeper, each step echoing too loudly. There, at the dining table, sat a figgy. I knew it was my grandmother, but only at first. As I stepped closer, her face began to peel away, like old wallpaper, curling at the edges. Beneath it, there was no skull, no flesh, just a hollow cavity. She reached out a hand and whispered, "Do you remember what you left behind?" I couldn't speak. "You took the first step. Now you must take the last." Her mouth began to open wider, impossibly wide, and inside wasn't a throat, but the path, red, pulsing, twisting inside her. I ran. Outside, the others stood frozen. Behind me, the house groaned and then collapsed, not into rubble, but into itself, folding like paper, vanishing without a sound. Only the blood path remained, stretched even thinner now, wobbling like it might vanish completely. "We have to go," I gasped. Jenna nodded. "We're being shown things, pieces of us. It's trying to wear us down." Marcus exhaled slowly. "What happens if we get to the end?" "I don't think there is an end," I said. And then a voice rang out. Tyler's. It echoed down the alley behind the houses. "Guys, is that you?" We turned. He stood there, smiling. Clean. Whole. Like nothing had happened, but his eyes were solid black, not like pupils, not like possessed, just nothingness. "Don't come closer," Leila whispered. Tyler tilted his head. "Why?" "It's me." But even his voice had changed. Slightly higher, a little too smooth, as if he was practicing being human. And behind him, more figures stepped into the street. Each one a version of someone we knew. My mother, Marcus's little brother, Leila's ex-boyfriend, Jenna's childhood best friend. All of them with the same black, featureless eyes. All of them smiling too wide. And the path, the blood path, suddenly flared, burning brighter than ever, as if warning us, do not stop walking. So we did. We turned our backs on them all, and we ran. We didn't look back. The things behind us, they weren't people, not anymore. Whatever had worn Tyler's face was something hollow, something that mimicked familiarity like a spider mimics stillness. And when we ran, the street beneath our feet shifted, wood and bone grinding together in a rhythm that matched our breathless panic. The path, still faintly pulsing, led us out of the town's warped main street and toward a wooded incline. The blood trail darkened again, thickening, as if it had found new fuel. Behind us, the town remained eerily silent, though I swear I could still feel those smiles stretching in the dark, wide enough to split skin. No one spoke for a long time. The forest ahead wasn't like the one we'd left before. This one was skeletal. Dead trees stretched upward like shattered ribs from a buried colossus, and the ground was littered with withered leaves that disintegrated beneath our steps. Even the air felt different, dry, charged, like the world was holding its breath before a scream. "Where are we now?" Jenna whispered. Marcus didn't answer. He was bleeding, just a little, from where a sharp branch had caught his shoulder during the sprint. He didn't seem to notice. His eyes had gone dull, focused on something only he could see. Layla crouched beside him, pressing a sleeve against the wound. "We need to stop," she said, "even just for a second, or we'll fall apart." I wanted to tell her we didn't have time, that resting meant giving them a chance to catch up. But my legs were shaking, and my lungs felt like they were being crushed from the inside. We found a spot at the base of a dead tree, where the path ran straight between two gnarled trunks before disappearing into another curve. There was something odd about the place. It didn't feel safer, but it felt like something. Maybe it was the carvings on the bark, dozens of names scratched in jagged, frantic scrawls. Some were fresh, others nearly eroded by time. But what made my heart stall was seeing my name among them. Not once, but 3 times. MIAH, Maya Hall, Maya Hall, missing. "I don't remember writing this," I said aloud. "You didn't," Layla whispered. "Not this version of you. The sun, or whatever light source this world had, began to dim, plunging the woods into a deep twilight. Shadows stretched unnaturally, slipping across the path like oil. That's when we saw the cabin. It stood ahead just off the trail, crooked and half sunk into the ground, as if it had grown out of the rot beneath the forest. Its roof sloped unevenly, and something moved behind the dirty glass of the single window. Layla grabbed my wrist. "We shouldn't." But the blood bath. It turned toward the cabin, not past it, into it. We had a choice again. Or so it wanted us to believe. Inside, the cabin was quiet. Dust hung thick in the air. The floor creaked with every step. A fire crackled low in the hearth, though there was no wood. Just coals that seemed to shimmer with memories. Above the fireplace was a mirror, and not just any mirror. It reflected what we feared. I saw myself alone, standing at the edge of the woods, blood dripping from my fingers, clothes torn, screaming into a world that no longer knew who I was. Jenna saw herself buried in earth, eyes open, unable to scream. Layla cried out and backed away from the mirror so fast she fell. I didn't ask what she saw. And Marcus stepped closer. Too close. His reflection didn't move like his body. It smiled. "Marcus," I said softly, "step away." But he didn't. He leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass. And then the mirror reached back. A hand, black, thin, with too many fingers, slid out of the mirror and touched his chest. Marcus gasped, arching backward, eyes wide. The hand curled and pulled. Jenna screamed. Layla grabbed Marcus, but it was like trying to hold on to smoke. He was being drawn in, piece by piece, reflection first. I saw his face warp, split open in the glass, showing layers that didn't belong to any human. Bones shifted like puzzle pieces. Eyes vanished. He didn't even scream. He accepted it. And then he was gone. The mirror cracked, and Marcus's name appeared, scratched deep into the wood below it. We fled the cabin. Back on the path, it had thickened again. It was just the three of us now. I didn't cry, I couldn't. My mind kept drifting to one thing Marcus had said earlier, back in the house. What happens if we get to the end? And now, I was starting to understand. This path wasn't just a curse. It was a filter. It peeled away layers of us. Our memories, our fears, our sense of reality. Until only the rawest parts remained. And then it fed on them. It needed them, like a parasite that had grown clever. We walked. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time bled her the way everything else did, slowly and with intent. Eventually, we reached a bridge. Wooden. Suspended by frayed rope over a ravine so deep, we couldn't see the bottom. Fog curled below, like a living thing. The path crossed it. But on the other side, there was no forest, no town. Just a door. A single rotting door, standing upright in the middle of an open field. I stared at it, and I knew we'd seen that door before. Not in real life, in dreams. It was the door I used to draw in the margins of notebooks as a kid. The one Layla once said she saw in her nightmares before she met me. The one Jenna described during a sleepover years ago. The one she said led to the place where things wait. What if this is the end? Layla asked. Jenna shook her head. No, it's the beginning. The path doesn't end. It just decides who gets through. We crossed the bridge. Each step groaned. Below, something laughed. It wasn't human. We didn't speak until we stood in front of the door. There was a single phrase etched into its surface in flaking crimson letters. You remember too much. Jenna reached for the handle. Layla stopped her. No, not all of us. Jenna's eyes widened, and for a second I didn't understand. Then I did. Layla wasn't Layla anymore. Her eyes were too still, too blank. The real Layla had never left that town. The thing beside us smiled and reached for Jenna. I didn't think. I pushed her aside and flung the door open. Light, blinding, searing poured out. And then, we fell through. Story 3. With every breath, a piece of me disappears. I moved into the apartment on West 72nd Street just as the leaves began to turn. New York in autumn was supposed to be beautiful, romantic even. But there was something off about the building from the first time I stepped into it. The air in the lobby felt heavier than it should have, like it hadn't moved in years. The receptionist, an elderly woman named Mrs. Klein, sat behind a yellow desk with her eyes locked onto a small black and white TV. She didn't look up when I walked in. Didn't even flinch when I said hello. I should have taken that as a sign. The apartment itself wasn't anything special. One bedroom, peeling wallpaper in the hallway. A water heater that groaned at night like it was mourning something. But I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 6 years, and I wasn't in the mood to be picky. I needed solitude, silence, a reset. I got more than I bargained for. The first night was uneventful, save for a slight draft that seeped through the vents, even though the windows were all shut. I remember lying on the mattress, still wrapped in plastic, watching the shadows on the ceiling flicker with the headlights passing outside. At around 2:30 a.m., I felt something strange. Not fear exactly, more like awareness, like the room had taken notice of me. And then I took a breath. It was shallow, almost instinctive, but it felt wrong. The air tasted metallic, like old pennies in something burnt. My chest tightened, as if I'd inhaled more than oxygen. Something thicker. Something alive. I blamed the old ventilation system, even laughed to myself. But when I got up the next morning, my left hand felt numb. I brushed it off, told myself it was probably bad posture or the cold. But deep down, a quieter part of me, the part I've learned to listen to only after it's too late, whispered that it wasn't. By the third night, the numbness had spread. First my hand, then part of my forearm. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked faded. The color in my face was duller, like a photo left out in the sun too long. And then came the voice. Not loud, not even clear. Just a whisper that scraped against my eardrums like fingernails on damp glass. Breathe slower. I froze, my toothbrush midair. My bathroom doesn't have vents, the windows sealed shut. I remember standing there for what felt like forever, staring into the mirror, trying to convince myself I hadn't heard anything. But something in my gut twisted the longer I looked at my reflection. My face. It blinked a second too late. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called my landlord, a man named Mr. Haskins. He sounded annoyed when I asked if there had ever been complaints about the air in the building. "What are you getting at?" he barked. I hesitated. "I don't know. There's a weird smell, metallic, almost burnt." Silence. Then he said, "Nobody else has complained. If you're sick, go see a doctor." He hung up, so I did. I booked an appointment with a general practitioner downtown. Dr. Remy, a kind-eyed woman who wore lavender gloves and had a quiet way of looking at you like she could read your pulse from your stare alone. She ran a few tests. Blood work, oxygen levels, reflexes. "Everything's normal," she said, pulling off her gloves. "You're healthy." But I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. Like I'm disappearing, like something's taken pieces of me. She didn't laugh. Instead, she scribbled something on a notepad and handed it to me. A therapist's name. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, too scared to breathe too deeply. I counted the seconds between each inhale, wondering if that whisper would come back. But it didn't. Not that night. It returned 2 nights later. This time, it came with the sound of something dragging across the floorboards. Slow, deliberate. I shot up and turned on every light in the apartment. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The door was locked. And then I noticed it. On the wall near the foot of my bed, something had been scrawled in charcoal. Just 2 words. "Inhale me." I swear to you, my windows were locked. I live alone. I don't sleepwalk. But somehow, something had written over it, that in jagged, frantic lines. I scrubbed it off, but the wall stayed slightly darker where the words had been. I didn't sleep that night either. I started spending more time at cafes and bookstores during the day, avoiding my apartment as much as I could. But the nights always came, and with them, the feeling that I was being watched. Not just watched, wanted. I would lie in bed and feel the air around me thicken, like it was crowding into my lungs uninvited. Each morning, something new was missing. A patch of skin near my collarbone had gone numb. My left eye wouldn't track movement properly. I tried sleeping with a mask, then holding my breath. But even without air, I felt it, the pull, like something had marked me. Like every breath I took wasn't mine anymore. Desperate, I searched online. Forums about haunted apartments, urban legends. I found one post buried deep in a thread about haunted air. A user named Nocturnal Sigh had written, "If the air feels heavy and your body fades, you're breathing in someone else's death." There was no reply, No follow-up post, just that single sentence. The next morning, I woke up to find a piece of my shadow missing. It sounds insane, I know. But when I stepped into the light of my bathroom, my silhouette didn't match my body. The shoulder was too short, one leg too narrow. It looked like someone else had started replacing me, piece by piece. And the worst part? I wasn't scared anymore. I was tired, hollow, as if the thing in the air had already taken the part of me that could be scared. Last night, I saw it, not clearly, just a shimmer near the ceiling. A ripple in the air like heat rising off asphalt. It drifted down slowly, weightless, and hovered near my mouth. I tried not to breathe, but my lungs betrayed me. One inhale, the coldest breath I've ever taken. This morning, my voice is gone. I try to scream, but no sound comes, only the faint rustle of air, moving on its own. And now, as I write this, my fingers barely move. I can't feel my toes, but I do feel it watching. Closer now, waiting. The worst part? I think it's learning to breathe on its own. And when it no longer needs me, what happens to the rest of me? It's been 3 days since I lost my voice. I don't mean hoarseness or some flu-induced muteness. I mean gone. Like something reached into my throat and took it. Like it was never mine to begin with. I try to scream, and only silence spills out. When I whisper, there's a noise, barely audible. A breathy hiss that doesn't follow my lips, but instead trails behind, as if another mouth was shaping the words after I tried to speak them. I haven't left the apartment in 2 days. It's not just fear anymore. It's the sense that outside doesn't exist. I stare at the door, willing my legs to walk toward it. But my body feels sluggish, heavy, like every cell inside me is turning to dust and waiting to be scattered with the next breath. I write notes to myself now, sticky notes on the fridge, scraps of torn receipts on the coffee table, scribbled messages reminding me I'm still here, still breathing, still me, but the handwriting is changing. This morning, I found a note on the bathroom mirror I don't remember writing. It said, "You don't need the whole body, just enough to stay." I wanted to believe I'd written it in a fugue state. Maybe exhaustion, maybe madness, but the handwriting was slightly slanted. Sharper loops, crueler edges, and it was written in the same charcoal I'd scrubbed off the wall nights ago. I didn't own charcoal. Still don't. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. It's dull, a kitchen knife, barely enough to cut chicken, but it makes me feel grounded, more real. The weight of it against my mattress is the only tangible thing that hasn't faded. But the air is hungrier now. There's this corner of my bedroom, near the vent, that always feels colder. And last night, I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Steady, rhythmic, right in sync with the rise and fall of my chest. Until it wasn't. It inhaled when I exhaled. It exhaled when I held my breath, like it was practicing. Around 3 a.m., I bolted upright, drenched in sweat. I don't know what woke me. Maybe the silence had become too silent. I looked over at the mirror across the room, and for a second, I saw something sitting on the edge of the bed, right next to me. Its body was hazy, almost smoky, like it was struggling to keep a shape. But its face, it had mine, except older, hollowed. A version of me drained of color, as though every breath it ever took was borrowed from someone else. And then it smiled. I lunged for the light switch, and it was gone. Just the room, quiet and undisturbed, but the pillow where it sat was still dented, still warm. I made a decision I should have made long ago. I left the apartment, or tried to. The building was quiet as usual. The elevator groaned when it opened. The hallway lights flickered, and Mrs. Klein, still behind the desk, finally looked up as I passed. Her eyes followed me in a way that made my skin crawl. "You've been breathing too much," she said without blinking. I froze. "What?" Her voice was like dry leaves rustling. "That air isn't free, dear. It belongs to someone." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My heart pounded so hard I could barely move my feet. She turned her eyes back to the black and white TV where static rolled like a storm. I took the stairs. Outside, the city didn't feel like the city anymore. People walked past me, but no one seemed to see me. A dog barked at me and then whimpered, retreating behind its owner's legs. My reflection in a shop window lagged half a second behind, blinking after I did. I went straight to the library on 41st Street. I needed answers, not ghost stories, not forums written by paranoid shut-ins, but something old, something forgotten. That's when I found the name, Aris Mortem, Latin, the death in air. A book in the restricted archives referenced it. A collection of obscure American urban legends, compiled in the 1930s by a folklorist named Leland Kincaid. The librarian, a soft-spoken man with wire-rimmed glasses, let me access the digital scans. He warned me the text was fragmented, but the pieces chilled me more than anything I'd ever read. Ritual houses built atop collapsed plague wards. Residents reported the air feeling like breath held too long. Those who breathe without thought, who draw the air too freely, invite the siphon spirit. It cannot form without a host. Once it begins to take, it will not stop until the host is hollow. I stopped reading. It was me. Every word, every warning. It had a name, Aris Mortem, and I had invited it in. Every breath in that apartment, every gasp in the still of night had been a transaction I didn't know I was making. I left the library in a daze. On my way home, I felt it again, something tugging behind my ribcage. Not pain, not nausea, just a tug, like a leash inside my lungs, pulling me back. That night, I made a plan. I'd sleep somewhere else, a hotel, a friend's couch, anywhere that wasn't 4B. But when I opened the door to my apartment, something had changed. All the furniture was gone. The walls were blank. The bed, stripped bare, stood alone in the center of the room, and on it lay a single folded note. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was written in my handwriting, but not by me. "You left a door open." I walked in. Then in the corner, small and tight. "Keep breathing. I'm almost finished." I don't know what's left of me now. My voice is gone. My memories feel like dreams, soft at the edges. And when I look in the mirror, I see someone watching from inside my reflection, not behind me. Tonight I will try not to sleep. Tonight I will try not to breathe. But I think it's too late, because now it breathes when I don't. I haven't slept in 42 hours. That number is precise because every second since I found the note has crawled by like something sharp under my skin. I don't trust time anymore. Not after the apartment erased itself. Not after the last breath I took came back warmer than it went in, like someone had exhaled into my lungs. There's a noise in my ears now, a faint, fluttering static, like someone whispering just beyond hearing. It starts whenever I get close to sleep, whenever I forget for even a moment that I'm not alone in my own body. I've been hiding out at an all-night diner on 10th Avenue, the kind that smells like burnt grease and overbrewed coffee. The booths are cracked vinyl, and the waitress, Lydia, calls everyone horn without making eye contact. I've been here so long, she doesn't even charge me for the coffee anymore. She just refills it with a grim sort of pity and a glance like she's trying to figure out if I'm homeless or sick or dying. She wouldn't be wrong on any of those counts. The first night I came here, I sat in the corner booth and watched my reflection in the window. Not the people outside, not the passing cars, just the reflection. I watched it the way you'd watch a suspicious animal. The glass made everything dimmer, slightly doubled. That's when I noticed the other me blink too late again, and smiled when I didn't. I turned my head quickly. The real me didn't smile, but the reflection had already returned to match me perfectly. It wants to be me. It's learning. And every time I breathe, I give it more. This morning, Lydia slid into the booth across from me. "You sleep in here now?" she asked without judgment. I tried to smile, but it must have looked wrong because her face stiffened. "You look like death, hon." I scribbled on the notepad I've been using. "What do you see when you look at me?" She stared at the words, then back at me. "You really want to know?" I nodded. She leaned in. "You look like someone who's been hollowed out from the inside, like a puppet made of skin." Her words hit harder than they should have. I should have laughed, but I just wrote one more thing. "Do you believe in things you can't see?" Lydia leaned back. Not until they breathed down my neck. I think she knew more than she let on. There was a flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. A memory she didn't want to dig up. She didn't say another word after that. Just poured me more coffee and left a pack of matches on the table. The logo on it was for a bookstore I'd never heard of. Gideon's Attic. Rare and occult texts. I took it as a sign. The store was buried between two shuttered pawn shops near Hell's Kitchen. You wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking for it. The windows were dusted over, and the bell above the door jingled like a throat clearing in a dead church. Inside, it smelled of mold and burned paper. Shelves leaned in strange directions. The air was warmer than it should have been. It felt used, like someone had been breathing in and out for too long without letting any of it go. A man stood behind the counter, sorting through a box of tattered paperbacks. He was tall, thin, with skin that looked like yellowed paper and eyes that didn't blink enough. I handed him the matchbook. Lydia sent me. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're late," he said. "I didn't know I had an appointment." "You do now." He led me to a back room with no lights. Just candles, dozens of them, flickering in tall glass jars that made the shadows dance like frantic limbs. On the table lay a single book, unmarked, leather-bound. It smelled like ash. He opened it and turned to a page already bookmarked with a twist of red string. There it was again. Aeris mortem. Some spirits dwell in earth, some in water. This one lives in air, he muttered, running his finger down the page. Not the air we all breathe, no. It lives in the breath that's left behind, in hospitals, in prison cells, in grief-choked bedrooms. He looked up at me. "Tell me, did someone die in your apartment?" "I don't know." "Then it wasn't yours to begin with." He turned another page, showed me a sketch, rough, smudged with charcoal. It looked like a person with their lungs drawn outside their body, full of smoke instead of blood. It takes form slowly, breath by breath, memory by memory. It inhabits the air you exhale. Then it enters back in with the next inhale. Eventually, the line between you and it disappears. My mouth went dry. I pointed to the page. How do I stop it? You don't. But he held up a hand. You can slow it. Only if you give it something else to feed on. Like a person. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I left the bookstore with a name. There'd been a woman who lived in my unit before me. Her name was Madeline Crow. Mid-40s. She died during lockdown, alone. No next of kin. The obituary said natural causes, but the doorman told me she'd been found days after her death. Her mouth wide open, her face twisted in terror. Her lungs had collapsed from the inside, as if she'd been trying to scream and something crawled down her throat instead. I went back to the apartment. I had to see for myself. But when I opened the door, it wasn't my apartment anymore. It was hers. Furniture I didn't own. Framed photos of people I didn't know. A calendar stuck on April 2020. I turned to leave and found that the door was gone. Just a wall now, smooth, pale blue. I spun, heart racing, and noticed the air was thick, almost gelatinous. It moved in waves I could see. My breath fogged in front of me, not from cold, but because something was pushing back. A voice, hers maybe, spoke from somewhere inside the wall. You can't give back what was never yours. And then the thing in the corner began to form again. First smoke, then a shimmer, then something vaguely me-shaped, but taller, smiling wider, eyes too deep. It opened its mouth and inhaled. I screamed silently as the room darkened, my vision tunneling, my limbs going cold. It was pulling harder now, not just breath, will, presence, identity. I reached for my pocket, Lydia's matchbook. With shaking hands I struck one. The flame flared, and the thing recoiled. It didn't scream, but I felt it scream. Every nerve in my body lit up with it. The apartment shuddered. The photos on the walls blackened and curled inward. The air turned sour, like singed hair and rot. I dropped the match to the floor and the flame spread impossibly fast. Not across the carpet, across the air. Like it was burning the very oxygen the spirit had claimed. And in that moment, I breathed. Not just air, but mine. For the first time in days. And the thing? It dissolved like breath on a cold window pane. I'm writing this from Lydia's couch. She doesn't ask questions, but every night now, she leaves a matchbook beside a cup of tea and says just one thing. Don't forget which breath is yours. I don't know if it's really gone. I still see my reflection delay sometimes. I still hear faint breathing when I sleep, but I keep the matches close. And I breathe carefully because I know now some air doesn't belong to you. And if you're not careful, something else will claim the breath you didn't know you gave. Lydia's apartment is quiet, in the way abandoned churches are. Still, but not empty. There's a sense of presence in the walls, like breath held just beneath the drywall. She doesn't keep much. A small sofa, 2 floor lamps, and a kettle that always seems to whistle just before I realize I need tea. Since the fire in the apartment, that burning of air, I've tried to convince myself the worst is over. I tell myself the thing is gone, dissolved in smoke and flame like mist at sunrise. But even now, even here, I feel it. At night, I dream of lungs, not mine, not human. Huge, ragged things that pulse behind cracked mirrors or crawl across ceilings like spiders. I wake up gasping, the echo of my own breath mocking me from somewhere inside the room. Lydia notices. She doesn't ask questions, but she watches. Her eyes linger when I cough, when I hesitate to inhale too deeply. She knows something followed me here. And last night, she told me why. It doesn't just take you, she said, lighting a cigarette with the calm hands of someone who's already died once. It remembers you, keeps a peace. I sat at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of green tea that tasted like copper. What does that mean? I asked hoarsely. She blew a stream of smoke toward the window. It means you're never really done with it. You burned your breath out of that apartment, sure. But you shared too much already. She tapped the ash into a chipped mug. There's a copy of you now. A ghost you helped build. My mouth went dry. A ghost? Not a soul. A shape. An echo. It wears your voice. Your scent. It knows where you'll go before you get there because it's breathing through you. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Tell me something, she continued, eyes never leaving mine. When you exhale, does it ever feel like something's still inside? I thought back to the last time I truly let my lungs empty. How the end of every breath now left me feeling incomplete. Yes, I whispered. She nodded like she already knew. That's how it starts. The next morning, I went back to Gideon's attic. The bookstore smelled worse this time, like paper soaked in mildew, and something old enough to forget its own name. The man behind the counter was gone. In his place was a woman wearing a grey shawl and gloves that looked stitched from moth wings. I asked about the book, the one with Eris Mortem in it. She stared at me, not blinking. You opened it. I read it. Then it read you back. The words felt like ice water poured down my spine. I need to know how to stop it, I said. For good. You can't, she replied flatly. Not anymore. I clenched my fists. Then help me contain it. Trap it. She turned, gliding into the back room, her shawl trailing like smoke. I followed her down a narrow hallway lined with faded portraits. None of the faces had eyes, just blank ovals where expression should have been. At the end was a black door. She didn't knock, just opened it. Inside was a room with no books, only breath. The walls pulsed. The air was wet. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of jars lined the shelves, sealed tight with wax and stained cloth. Each one contained something, fog, smoke, or maybe breath suspended in some strange alchemy. These, she whispered, are the lost. What are they? Echoes of those who gave too much. Some willingly, most didn't know. She walked over to one jar and held it up. Inside I saw a mouth, just the outline of lips and teeth, floating in fog. This one used to be my son. I recoiled. You captured him, she smiled. No, I kept what was left. She handed me a small glass vial, empty except for a single red thread, coiled like a resting worm. You need to breathe into it. I hesitated. Why? To separate yourself, to make a boundary. You must claim your breath before it does. I exhaled slowly into the vial. The thread twitched. She sealed it with wax and whispered words I didn't understand. It will fight now, she said, because it knows you remember. That night back at Lydia's, things began to change. It started with the mirrors. I walked past the bathroom and saw my reflection. Paused. It just stood there, not following me, not mimicking, just waiting. Later, I heard the sound of wet breathing coming from the kitchen, but no one was there. And just before dawn, I found Lydia standing on the fire escape in her nightgown, staring into the sky like she expected it to speak. What are you doing? I whispered. She turned slowly. I saw you, she said, in the hallway. But it wasn't you. I've been in bed. I know. Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. On the third night, the attack came. I don't know what else to call it. I had just fallen asleep when I woke to the sensation of someone sitting on my chest. Not just heavy, filling, like air being forced into me. My body jerked awake, but I couldn't move. Something hovered inches from my face. I couldn't see it, not directly, but I felt it. Its mouth aligned with mine, its lungs inside my own. It was inhaling me while I slept. I tried to scream, couldn't. Tried to grab the knife Lydia kept by the bed, couldn't. Then cracked glass shattered. Lydia had thrown the vial. The red thread unraveled midair and screeched. I didn't even know breath could scream. The thing above me shuddered, then ripped backward like smoke being sucked into a vacuum. My lungs emptied so violently, I collapsed onto the floor, gagging. When I looked up, Lydia held the lighter to the end of the red thread. The flame caught instantly, the room filled with a sound like 1,000 whispers, gasping at once, and then silence. Real, deafening, holy silence. Later, I asked her what happened. She stared at the spot on the floor where the thing had disappeared. "You just severed it," she said softly. "You burned your own echo." I didn't know what to feel. Relief, mourning. It felt like losing a part of myself I didn't know had grown in someone else's lungs. Now it's been 5 nights. The mirrors are quiet. The air moves naturally. I breathe without fear. But sometimes, when I sit too still, I think about all those jars in the back of Gideon's attic. How many echoes still linger. How many people gave their last breath without realizing someone or something was waiting to catch it. And I wonder, when I die, will I go quietly? Or will it return for one final inhale? All I know is this: the air is not ours, and some breaths never stop traveling. Story 4. Blood-filled pond. The haunting secret beneath. I never planned on buying an old mansion in upstate New York. It wasn't even on my radar. But after the divorce and my mother's death, all within the same 3 months, I wanted distance. From people, from memories, from the echo of my own voice, ricocheting off the blank walls of an empty apartment. So when I saw the listing for the Ashmore estate, a sprawling Gothic-style property just outside a quiet town called Renfield, I didn't think twice. The photos showed ivy-covered brick walls, weather-worn stone statues, and most captivating of all, a beautifully maintained fish pond in the backyard. It looked peaceful, untouched, like it had been waiting for me. The realtor, a woman named Trudy, who wore too much perfume and avoided eye contact when I asked about the house's history, rushed me through the paperwork. "No one's lived here in years," she mumbled. "Last owner was some art dealer, liked to keep to himself." That was the only explanation I got. And at the time, it was enough. The first thing I noticed upon arriving was how silent the place was. Not peaceful silence, hollow silence. The kind you feel in your chest, like something is watching and waiting for you to breathe too loud. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a cracked stone path weaving through overgrown hedges and up to the house's grand front door. But my eyes kept drifting to the backyard, to the glint of sunlight reflecting off the water behind the house. The pond. It was larger than I expected, almost the size of a small swimming pool. There were ornate carvings of koi and dragons along the stone edge, and a half-submerged statue of a woman with a broken face stood in the center, moss climbing her shoulders like hands. What struck me most was how pristine the water looked. Crystal clear, not a single leaf floating on the surface, even though the surrounding trees shook gently in the wind. There were fish too, fat, vibrant koi, circling lazily beneath the surface. And yet, something about them didn't seem right. Their scales shimmered not with golds and whites, but with a strange iridescence, almost reddish when the light hit them just so. I knelt by the edge and dipped my fingers into the water. Warm, warmer than it should have been. Inside, the house was a tomb of velvet drapes and dust. Furniture still stood as if someone had just stepped out to fetch a newspaper. Oil paintings, moody, abstract, and unsettling, hung crooked on the walls. Most doors were locked, but I had the keys. Trudy had given me a ring of at least 20. When I asked why so many, she said, "Old houses like this, they have secrets. You'll figure them out." That first night, I slept in the guest room on the second floor. I hadn't unpacked much beyond a suitcase and my phone charger. I didn't realize until I was brushing my teeth that the water from the faucet had a faint, metallic taste. I made a mental note to have the plumbing checked. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of splashing. It was soft, deliberate, like someone standing still in a pool and slowly moving their arms back and forth. I looked out the window. The pond was visible, its surface glowing faintly under the moonlight. There was a figure, not a person exactly, more like a tall shadow, humanoid in shape, standing knee-deep in the pond. It didn't move. It just stood there, back to me, with shoulders unnaturally hunched and arms hanging stiff by its sides. I blinked, and it was gone. By morning, I convinced myself it was a dream, a product of stress, new surroundings, and too much wine. But when I stepped out into the backyard, I noticed something odd. One of the koi was dead, floating belly up near the edge, its mouth wide open, gills torn. I turned away, disturbed, and that's when I saw the basement door. It was outside the house, built into the ground near the hedges, half covered by fallen leaves and grime. It looked more like a storm shelter, rusted, padlocked, and forgotten. One of the keys on the ring Trudy gave me fit perfectly. The stairs down were steep and cold. Each step creaked, not with age, but like they were warning me. At the bottom was a narrow hallway with pipes overhead and a single swinging bulb at the far end. The air was heavy, damp, the kind of damp that clung to your skin like breath. To the left was a wooden door, slightly ajar. Behind it was what I can only describe as a feeding room. A large stone basin dominated the center, and dried brownish stains coated its edges. Hooks lined the walls, and the smell, copper and rot, was so thick I had to cover my nose. But it wasn't until I followed the thin trail of crimson along the cracked floor that I understood. The basin connected to a series of pipes. Pipes that led up, back toward the pond. I ran outside, heart pounding, and crouched by the edge of the water again. It was still clear, still warm, but when I dipped my fingers in this time, they came out stained. Not with blood exactly, but something like blood. Thin, dark, and strangely sweet-smelling. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the stairs near the guest room window, watching the pond like it might rear up and consume the whole backyard. And at exactly 3:17 a.m. again, I saw her, the statue. She was moving, no longer broken, her face intact, her arms slowly rising as if emerging from prayer. The water around her bubbled, and the koi scattered violently. Then came the whispering, not words, not even language, just wet rattling sounds like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of fluid. I stumbled backward and fell hard against the hallway wall. When I looked again, the statue was as it had been, frozen, chipped, and unmoving. The next morning, I drove into Renfield to ask about the previous owner. The clerk at the diner, a lanky man with deep-set eyes, looked at me for a long time before answering. Art dealer, yeah. Hugo something, kept to himself. Folks say he was trying to make things down there. Paintings, yes, but not with paint. You understand? I didn't. Not really. Until he added, he disappeared 5 years ago. No one ever found a body. Just sludge in the pond, red as wine. I left without finishing my coffee. And that night, when I returned home, the pond was still full. It's always full, even though I haven't filled it. Even though I haven't watered the backyard. Even though the plumbing's been cut and the basement locked again. The pond doesn't care. Something beneath it breathes, waits, feeds, and I think it's hungry again. The next morning, I watched the pond from the kitchen window for what must have been an hour, cradling a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The surface glistened with an almost deceptive stillness. The koi moved in slow, lazy spirals, elegant, red-tinged bodies weaving through the water as if they weren't aware or didn't care about the things buried beneath them. But I knew. I felt it. Something was using this pond as more than just a place to swim. It was a surface, a veil, and like all veils, it could be lifted. I didn't go to work that day. In fact, I barely moved from the house. My thoughts were circling, feverish. Every sound made my skin prickle. At one point, the refrigerator kicked on and I nearly jumped out of my chair. That afternoon, I went back to the basement. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe more evidence. Maybe answers. What I found instead was a note. One that hadn't been there before. It was pinned to the inside of the basement door with a rusted nail, folded once and yellowed at the edges. No name, just 2 words scribbled in jagged handwriting. Don't drain. I stared at it, fingers trembling. The message wasn't old, at least not decades old. The ink hadn't faded, and the paper hadn't curled. Someone had been here recently, possibly last night. But how? I checked all the locks, the doors, the windows. Nothing broken, no signs of forced entry. Yet somehow, someone had gotten into my house and left me a warning. Or maybe it wasn't someone. Maybe it was something already inside. Later that evening, I invited over a plumber named Ellis, one of the few repairmen in town willing to come out to Ashmore Estate. When I gave him the address, there was a pause on the other end of the phone. "Old art guy's place?" he asked. "Yeah. Why?" He didn't answer. Ellis arrived just after sunset. A burly man in his 50s with grease-streaked overalls and a permanent squint. He was the type you could trust to fix things without too many questions. We made our way down to the basement, and I showed him the basin, the pipes, and the strange trail that disappeared into the wall near the stairs. He squatted beside the basin and ran his finger along the edge. "That ain't rust," he muttered. "Looks like it's been used for draining animals, maybe. But this setup," he gestured at the pipe system, "this wasn't made for slaughter. It's too ritualistic." "Ritualistic," I echoed. He gave me a look, the kind that said you already know. "You ever wonder what happens if you follow these pipes all the way up? I know where they lead, I said quietly. The pond. That's when Ellis stood, brushed off his hands, and walked toward the stairwell. You ever hear about the Ashmore boy? He asked. No, he paused halfway up the stairs. Happened maybe 35 years ago. Family used to live here before the art guy. One night, the youngest boy, 8 years old, went missing, vanished from his bed. Folks searched the house, the woods, even drained the well out back. But the pond? He shook his head. They never touched the pond, said it was sacred, family tradition, old money superstition. I stared at him. They thought the pond was sacred? Not sacred. He scratched his chin. Protected. That night, long after Ellis had gone and the air had settled back into its stale quiet, I crept back outside with a flashlight. I don't know what drove me to do it. Curiosity, desperation, dread. Maybe all three. But I couldn't stay away anymore. The pond had become the centerpiece of everything wrong in this house, and I needed to see what it was hiding. I walked to the edge, crouched down, and swept the beam of my flashlight across the surface. The koi scattered in response, but the water remained disturbingly clear. Too clear. I could see the bottom. A smooth stone floor, faintly glimmering with sediment. But then I noticed something. In the center of the pond beneath the statue, there was a shape, rectangular, out of place. I leaned closer. It was a door, a wooden trapdoor embedded in the stone, barely visible under the flickering light and rippling water. My breath caught. I hadn't seen it before, not once in the days I'd been here. But now it was unmistakable. A trapdoor beneath the pond. A chill rolled through me, and I backed away. I didn't sleep that night. The dreams came hard and fast. Visions of the pond draining on its own, revealing a black spiral staircase leading downward. Figures cloaked in red standing in a circle, chanting words I couldn't understand. The statue in the center, opening its eyes. And then, right before I woke, I saw myself, floating face down in the pond, blood spilling from my ears like ink in water. The next morning, I drove back into Renfield. This time, I went to the town library, a place that felt, at least marginally, safer than my own home. I dug through town records, news clippings, even property maps. That's when I found it. A faded blueprint of the Ashmore estate, dated 1906. The pond wasn't there. Instead, in its place was a small stone chapel. Notes in the margin marked it as decommissioned, buried following structural collapse, 1923. The blood drained from my face. The pond had been built over the chapel. No wonder the plumbing looked ritualistic. No wonder the water never dried. This wasn't a pond. It was a seal. When I returned home, I found something waiting for me on the front porch. A koi fish, dead. Its body cleaved open, but not by animal teeth, no. The cuts were precise, deliberate, surgical, and carved into its side as if someone had etched it with a razor. We never stopped feeding it. I dropped it and staggered back, bile rising in my throat. There was no more denying it. The pond was alive, and someone, maybe everyone who'd lived here before, had been feeding it, keeping it full, keeping it quiet. But now I had broken the rhythm, interrupted the offering, and I could feel it watching, waiting, growing thirsty. I didn't leave the house for 3 days, not out of choice, but out of something heavier, a fur that had weight, that sat on my chest like a body and whispered things when the sun went down. Every door creaked like it was being opened from the other side. The lights flickered whether it rained or not. And the pond. The pond was no longer pretending. On the second night, I heard scraping beneath the floorboards. Not rodents, not pipes, but something slow, something deliberate, like fingers or claws, dragging themselves across wood. Then, at 3:17 a.m. sharp, I heard the sound of water rising. Not splashing, not pouring, rising, like it was breathing. I didn't dare look out the window. On the third day, I found something in my mailbox. An envelope, brittle and yellow, like the pages of an old Bible. No return address, just my name written in bold, slanted letters. Inside, a single Polaroid, dated 1986. It showed the backyard, unmistakably mine. But there was no pond, only cracked earth. And in the center, a group of 5 people standing in a circle around a pit. They were wearing robes, red, stained and hooded. Their hands were raised, palms out. And in the pit, barely visible, was something black. It wasn't shadow. It was alive, on the back of the photo, in red marker. We tried to bury it. It waited anyway. I needed answers, real ones. I went back to Renfield. Not to the library this time, but to the town's oldest resident, Mrs. Elsie Warren, who ran the antique bookstore by the church. Everyone knew her. Everyone whispered about her. They said she remembered the town before it had a name, that her late husband had died protecting the line. Whatever that meant. The shop smelled of rotting wood and rosewater. Stacks of brittle books towered like crooked teeth. When she looked up at me from behind her counter, her eyes were gray but sharp. "You bought the Ashmore house?" she said before I even spoke. I nodded. "I think I made a mistake." She chuckled dryly. "You think?" Then she waved me forward. "Come, sit. Tell me what you've seen." So I did. I told her everything. The pond that never dries, the basement basin, the door under the water, the Polaroid, the fish with carvings in its flesh. Her expression didn't change, not once. When I was finished, she said only one thing. "You opened the rhythm." What does that mean? Her fingers tapped against the wood. The Ashmore line was responsible. For decades, they fed it, hid it, revered it. The chapel was the original seal, long before they built that god-forsaken pond. Your predecessor, Mr. Hugo, he tried to kill it, tried to starve it. But things like that don't die. They sleep, and sleep is just hunger slowed. I swallowed hard. What is it? She finally met my eyes. No one knows. It came before the town, before the settlers. The natives wouldn't step foot near that patch of land. They called it Vuskatehnin, the place that leaks from the under. The early colonists thought it was a spring, until the first children disappeared. My voice was barely a whisper. "How do I stop it?" She leaned forward slow. "You don't. You survive it." Then she reached beneath the counter and handed me something wrapped in oilskin. A book, leather-bound, no title, no author. Inside were symbols, drawings, instructions. "You want answers?" she said. "Go into the pond. At night, touch the statue. It will either show you or take you." I returned home just before dusk. The pond was waiting for me. There was something different about it now. The water had gone almost black. Like ink diluted with oil, the koi no longer swam. They hovered, mouths open, eyes wide, as if frozen in fear. And the statue in the center? It had moved. The woman's head, once bowed in prayer, was now tilted toward the house, toward me. I didn't sleep. I waited. When the clock struck 3:16, I stepped outside. The air was heavy, like walking through warm fog. The wind had stopped. Even the crickets were silent. I stripped down to my jeans and climbed into the pond, the water lapping at my skin like it was eager. Each step deeper felt like descending into warm syrup. The koi parted silently, watching me. By the time I reached the statue, the water was up to my chest. I reached out and touched her face. It was warm. Then everything shifted. The world vanished. I was no longer in the pond. I stood in a vast stone chamber, circular, domed, and dripping with condensation. The ceiling rose into darkness. All around me were the red-robed figures from the Polaroid, but now they moved, chanting in whispers, too low to understand. In the center of the room was a well, and from that well rose it. I can't describe its shape. Not really. It changed every time I blinked. Sometimes it was a man, sometimes a beast, sometimes just a column of smoke with teeth. But I felt its eyes, if it had eyes, staring into me, through me, reading every part of me like a diary left open in a storm. Then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in feeling. You disturbed the seal. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I managed to croak out, "What do you want?" 1,000 voices answered at once. Thirst. I came to on the edge of the pond, gasping for air. My hands were shaking. My body was covered in fine cuts, as if I had swum through barbed wire. The koi were gone. The water was still, but the statue now held something in its hands. A human tooth, still bloody, and carved into the base, newly etched, as if by fingernails. 3 nights left. I don't know what that means, but I have a feeling it isn't a warning. It's a countdown. I didn't sleep after I found the tooth. I sat on the floor of the living room, wrapped in an old wool blanket, watching the shadows stretch across the hardwood. Every creak, every distant gust of wind pressing against the old window panes made me flinch. The house was no longer mine. It never was. It belonged to it, and I was merely occupying the space between its breaths. The tooth lay on the coffee table, next to the oilskin book Elsie had given me. I tried to read more of it after returning from the pond, but most of the writing was in Latin, or something that looked like Latin, twisted into a script that danced when you stared too long. Some pages pulsed under my fingertips, as if the ink hadn't dried, but one page had been marked with a pressed black flower, brittle and reeking of something foul. On that page was a crude drawing, a pond, a chapel below it, and beneath that, something coiled, something immense. The text beside it translated roughly to, "When the seal is thinned, 3 offerings will be demanded. 3 nights, 3 signs. Fail to feed the deep, and it will feed itself." I stared at that line until the sun began to rise, bleeding pale gold through the grimy windows. The first sign came just after noon. I was in the kitchen, trying to boil water for tea. Though every time I turned the tap, what came out smelled faintly of iron. I gave up and stepped outside, needing to breathe. The air had that sour, electric taste that comes before a storm. That's when I saw the girl. She was standing at the far end of the property line, barefoot in the tall grass, wearing a faded blue dress that fluttered, though the air was still. Her skin was grayish, her hair tangled, and she had something clenched tightly in one hand. A stuffed rabbit, soaked to the stuffing. I called out to her. She didn't move. I took a step closer. "Are you lost?" Still no answer. Another step. I noticed the grass around her feet was blackened, as if scorched. The longer I looked, the more I realized her features weren't right, too symmetrical. Her mouth too still, and her eyes. God, her eyes were just sockets. I blinked. She was gone. But in her place, nestled in the flattened grass, was a second tooth. Another human molar. I backed away slowly and didn't go outside again. At sunset, the basement lights began to flicker. I hadn't been down there since Ellis came, but now I felt drawn to it, as if something below was calling my name. Not with sound, with gravity. Each step felt colder than the last. The air pressed in, heavy with moisture and rot. And when I reached the bottom, I noticed the door to the feeding room, the one I'd left closed, was now ajar. I pushed it open. The basin had been scrubbed clean. Not just clean, gleaming. Like someone had come down and polished it with oil and steel wool. The hooks were empty now, save one, which held a length of red cloth. A robe, on the wall behind the basin, scrawled in something that gleamed like oil slick, were the words, "The first night brings the watcher." I didn't understand it then, but I would. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I awoke to the sound of tapping. Not knocking, tapping, delicate, rhythmic, like bone on glass. It was coming from the window. I sat up slowly. My body ached, my head throbbed. The air was freezing now, despite the broken heater humming uselessly in the corner. The tapping continued. I turned to the window and saw it. A figure, tall and skeletal, wrapped in what looked like damp red fabric. Its face was elongated, hollow, with dark slits where eyes should have been. It didn't breathe. It didn't move. It simply stood at the window, tapping one long, blackened finger against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't dare move. Then it tilted its head. Not slowly, violently. A sharp crack echoed across the room as its neck twisted 90 degrees. Eye sockets now aligned directly with mine. And I heard it. Not with ears, with my mind. First night. The watcher ceased. The window cracked. I screamed, scrambled backward, knocking over the lamp, clutching the wool blanket like it could save me. I didn't take my eyes off the window, but the thing was gone. No trace. No footprint in the frost below the sill. But there, resting on the inside of the pane, was another tooth. That made three. 3 teeth in less than 24 hours. I didn't need the book to tell me what came next. Offerings. And if I didn't give them, I would become one. In the morning, I called Ellis. He didn't answer. I drove into town. His truck was parked outside his house, keys still in the ignition. Inside, the lights were on, and so was the kitchen sink. Water running thick and red. And Ellis? Gone. Not a trace. No signs of struggle. Only one thing left behind. A stuffed rabbit, soaked, staring up at me from the couch. I went back to Elsie's shop, but it was closed. A paper sign hung on the inside. Closed for burial. My chest tightened. I banged on the door, shouted her name, circled the building. Nothing. I don't know who was being buried, but I know it's connected. I know the pond is waking up. Hungrier, louder, more impatient. Tonight is the second night. The book says the second sign is the breather from below. I don't know what that means, but I've locked every door, closed every curtain. The pond from my window is still, but I don't trust it anymore. Still water only pretends to sleep, and I think tonight it's coming closer. Story 5. The blood-sucking wall. I should have known the moment I stepped inside the house. There was something about it, an odd stillness that clung to the air. It wasn't just the peeling wallpaper, the dust motes floating lazily in the faint light, or the creaking floorboards. It was the way the house seemed to be watching me. I thought it was just my imagination. But as the days passed, I realized it wasn't. The boarding house on Pine Avenue had been abandoned for years, its last tenants leaving with no explanation. When I arrived, I found the place in a state of decay. Yet something about it whispered to me, offering a sense of strange comfort. I was new to town, just looking for a place to stay, until I found something permanent. The landlord was old, practically a ghost himself, but he didn't seem to care about the state of the building. "You'll get used to it," he said, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. The room I took was at the back of the house, a small cramped space with a faded rug and a single window that looked out into the overgrown yard. At night, the house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional whisper of wind or the sound of pipes groaning under the floorboards. But then, there was the wall, the corner of the room where the blood stained the bricks. At first, I thought it was just an odd stain, a dark mark that came with age and wear. But every day, the stain seemed to grow darker, more vivid. By the end of my second week, the blood was fresh, as if someone had spilled it just moments ago. I tried to ignore it. After all, this was an old house. Things happened. But every time I lay in bed, the corner of the wall seemed to pulse, the stain spreading a little further. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind it, something waiting. One night, after a long shift at the diner, I came back to the room, feeling exhausted, my mind foggy from the monotonous routine. As I was about to collapse into bed, something caught my eye. The wall. It wasn't just blood now. It was seeping through the cracks in the bricks, pooling on the floor beneath. My heart raced. My breath caught in my throat. I had to know what was behind this. It was the only thing my mind could focus on. The only thing that mattered. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed a hammer from the small toolbox I had stashed under the bed and approached the wall with shaky hands. The moment the hammer struck the first brick, the air seemed to change. The temperature dropped, the house groaning under its weight as if it had just woken from a long slumber. I hesitated for a moment, but some force, pushed me forward, urging me to continue. The bricks crumbled easily under my blows, and soon a hole big enough to peer through appeared. I stopped breathless, staring into the dark space beyond. The smell hit me first, sour and rancid, like something that had been rotting for years. I recoiled, but forced myself to look again. The hole led to a small, narrow alcove, a cavity within the wall, dark and suffocating. But what really sent chills down my spine was the shape inside. Something was there, something human. I reached in, my hand trembling, and pulled at what looked like a sleeve, though the fabric had long since rotted away. It felt stiff, unnatural. With a sharp tug, I yanked it free. And that's when I saw it. A body. The figure was curled up, its limbs twisted in grotesque positions, as if trying to escape from its confines. It was pale, the skin stretched tight over bone, eyes wide open but glazed over, staring at nothing. The blood wasn't just on the wall. It was coming from the body, seeping into the cracks of the bricks like some terrible offering to the house. I stumbled back, gasping, trying to breathe, but the air felt thick, suffocating. My vision blurred, my heart pounded. What had I just uncovered? And why had I not noticed the faint, almost imperceptible sound that had been there all along? As if the walls were whispering, begging me to stay away. The whispers grew louder. They echoed around the room, in the walls, the ceiling, the floor. I couldn't understand the words, but they were unmistakable in their intent. You should have left. Now it's too late. I scrambled to my feet, my heart thundering in my chest. But then, the whispers stopped. The house fell silent, save for the distant creaks of the floorboards. I turned to the hole in the wall. The body was gone. I stared at the empty alcove, confusion washing over me. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? The blood stain on the floor was gone too, leaving no trace of what I had just witnessed. But the house had changed. The air was heavier, more oppressive. I could feel its eyes on me. It knew I had seen something I wasn't supposed to, and it wasn't finished with me yet. The next day, I went to the landlord, my hands shaking as I explained what had happened. He listened, his face impassive, and then simply said, "It's always been like that. The house has its secrets, but you'll get used to it." I didn't stay much longer after that. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, every step I took. And every night, the bloodstain returned, fresh and vivid, waiting for the next soul to uncover the truth. But some secrets aren't meant to be found. The weeks that followed were nothing short of a nightmare. Every day, I tried to convince myself that what I had seen in that wall, what I had uncovered, was just a product of my mind. A hallucination born from stress, loneliness, and the oppressive stillness of the house. But deep down I knew the truth. The house was alive in ways I couldn't explain, and it was keeping secrets. Secrets I was far too terrified to unravel. I moved out of my room in the back of the house, convinced that the blood-stained corner held some kind of malevolent force. I tried sleeping in the front room, closer to the main staircase, but the house was relentless. The walls creaked and groaned at night, like the sounds of something moving behind them. I didn't dare investigate again, not after the body had vanished. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The house seemed to be waiting, biding its time, as if it knew I was trying to escape. The whispers came back at night, so faint, so subtle, like the rustling of dry leaves. But they grew louder every night, until I couldn't sleep at all. They were no longer just whispers. They were voices, low and guttural, speaking words I couldn't quite make out, but that filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. And then there were the dreams. Each night I closed my eyes, only to be dragged into nightmares so vivid and real. I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air. In the dreams, the house was always the same, dilapidated, dark, and suffocating. But there was one constant, the bloodstain. Every night, I found myself back in that room, back in front of the wall, watching the blood spread, feeling its pulse against my skin. But now, it wasn't just blood. It was alive. In one dream, I reached out to touch the stain, my hand trembling as I pressed my palm against the brick. The moment my skin made contact, the wall shifted. The bricks cracked and crumbled away, revealing not just a body, but something worse. A figure, cloaked in shadow, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. It reached out, its fingers long and unnaturally thin. And in that moment, I knew it was coming for me. I woke up screaming, my heart racing, drenched in sweat. It was around this time that I met Sarah. She was another tenant who had moved in after I had. I hadn't noticed her at first. She kept to herself mostly, but her presence became a comfort of sorts. She had a quiet strength about her, something familiar, like she'd seen too much, and learned to carry the weight of it without letting it crush her. We spoke in passing a few times, and I found myself drawn to her, as if I could sense that she knew something about the house, something I couldn't quite grasp. I didn't trust many people, especially after what I had seen, but there was something about Sarah that made me feel like I could share the story of the wall. One evening, as I walked down the dimly lit hallway toward the kitchen, I saw Sarah standing by the staircase, staring up at the dark hallway that led to the back of the house, the same hallway that housed the bloodstain. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low and steady. It wasn't a question, but a statement, a confirmation. I froze, my throat tightening. "Seen what?" I managed to croak. She turned to face me, her eyes dark, a deep, sorrowful knowing in them. The wall, the blood, the body inside. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "It's not the first time. This house, it has a history. A terrible history." I swallowed my mouth dry as her words settled into me like an icy weight. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah glanced around the hallway, her eyes darting nervously, before she leaned in closer. "I've been here before. Not in this room, but in this house. Years ago. I lived here once, when I was younger, and I saw the wall. I saw the blood, the body. It wasn't the first time it happened, and I'm afraid it won't be the last." My heart pounded in my chest. "You've seen it too?" She nodded, her face pale, the color drained from her cheeks. "I was just like you, curious, terrified. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, until I couldn't deny it anymore. It's a curse, you see. The house feeds on the people who stay here. It traps them, keeps them, and when it's ready, it takes them." I took a step back, the air around me growing thick with unease. "What does it want?" She looked away, her gaze distant. "It wants to keep us, to feed off us. The blood, the body. It's a part of its ritual. Every tenant, every soul that stays here, feeds it. And once it has enough..." She trailed off, as if the thought alone was too horrible to finish. "Once it has enough, it brings you back, over and over again. You can't escape. You think you can leave, but it pulls you back in." I shuddered, the chill in my bones deepening. "Is that what happened to you? You left?" Sarah gave a small bitter laugh. "I tried, but it's never that simple. You think you're free, but the house doesn't let go so easily. It's part of us now, and it won't stop until it's taken everything." I turned away, my heart racing. "Then what do we do? How do we escape?" Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw fear in them. Real fear. You can't escape, not unless you understand what it wants. You have to find the heart of the house, the place where it's weakest, and destroy it. But that's easier said than done, because the house will fight back. The words lingered in the air like a heavy fog. I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me, and I knew Sarah wasn't lying. There was something deeply wrong with this place, something ancient and hungry. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. The whispers were louder now, more persistent, like they were trying to drive me mad. Every time I tried to focus, every time I tried to push the house from my mind, it was there, in the corner of my thoughts, lurking. I went to the wall again, unable to resist. The blood had returned, more vivid than before, the stain spreading across the floor. I pulled the hammer from under the bed and set to work, desperate to find out more. I had to know the truth. I couldn't stop now. As I pried at the bricks, my heart racing, I realized I wasn't alone. The house was awake, watching me. The whispers turned into screams, loud and shrill, as if the walls themselves were crying out in pain. The air grew thick, suffocating. I reached the final brick, my hands trembling, and pulled it free. And then I saw it. Not a body, but something worse. Something that had been waiting. It wasn't just part of the house, it was the house itself. I had hoped, even after everything, that I could leave it behind. I'd spent days and a days, still recovering from the night I tore the last brick from the wall. I expected to find the usual hollow cavity. Perhaps even the rotting body I had seen before. But what I uncovered, what I felt in that moment, was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The wall did not open up to a darkened, abandoned space as I thought it would. Instead, it split open to reveal an unsettling presence. The bricks fell away to expose the heart of the house itself, a pulsating, grotesque mass of shifting shadow and blood. The walls around me seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if the house were alive. The floor beneath my feet trembled with a deep, resounding vibration. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My mind couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. The blood that had once stained the walls was now a river, flowing from the house itself. An endless stream that poured from a fissure in the very foundation of the building. It was as if the house was bleeding. And then I heard it. A voice, low, deep. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. You shouldn't have come here. I froze. The air turned cold, suffocating. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get out of there before whatever was watching me found its way into my soul. But my legs wouldn't move. My body wouldn't obey. All I could do was stare, horrified, as the shadows in the center of the room twisted and writhed, slowly taking form. I froze. The air turned cold, suffocating. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get out of there before whatever was watching me found its way into my soul. But my legs wouldn't move. My body wouldn't obey. All I could do was stare, horrified, as the shadows in the center of the room twisted and writhed, slowly taking form. It was a figure. At first, it appeared to be a man, tall, thin, with hollow eyes, its face obscured by a dark cloak that seemed to absorb all light around it. But then, as it stepped closer, the features of its face became clearer, and I realized it was no man at all. The figure's skin was pale, almost translucent, its lips twisted into a grotesque, mocking smile. Its eyes, those eyes, were dark, empty voids that seemed to pierce through me, as if it could see every secret, every fear I had ever hidden. It reached out to me, its fingers stretching unnaturally long, the air around its hand vibrating with the same terrifying energy that filled the room. "You've awakened me," the voice continued, now more a whisper, though it echoed in my head like a terrible truth I couldn't escape. "You've given me the power to take you, to make you part of me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But all I could do was stand there, rooted to the spot, as the figure's hand touched my cheek. The moment it made contact, a cold fire surged through my veins. It wasn't just cold, it was ancient, unstoppable. The darkness within the figure seemed to seep into me, curling around my mind, my soul. I felt my strength begin to drain away, my body growing weak, my vision swimming with shadows. Suddenly, there was a loud crash behind me. Sarah? I turned, eyes wide, to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear. She rushed forward, her voice shaking with desperation. "Get away from it! You have to get out of here!" But before I could move, before I could make sense of her words, the figure turned toward her. I watched in horror as its eyes burned with an otherworldly rage. "No one leaves," the voice hissed. "No one ever leaves." The figure stretched out its hand, its fingers elongating as it reached for Sarah. She froze, her face stricken with terror, her body seemingly caught in the same invisible grip that held me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to save her, but I could barely keep my own consciousness intact, let alone fight for her. But then something unexpected happened. The floor beneath us trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just the house shaking. A deep rumbling sound, almost like an ancient growl, echoed through the walls. The blood, the very essence of the house, began to surge, twisting and spiraling toward the figure. It was as if the house itself was fighting back, rejecting the creature that had taken hold of it. The figure snarled, its hand retracting from Sarah as the blood began to pull away from it, like a leash yanked from a dog's neck. The creature howled in fury, its form shifting violently, as if trying to maintain its hold on the house, on us. "Run!" Sarah shouted. She grabbed my hand, her grip iron tight, and pulled me toward the doorway. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could move. My body obeyed, my legs shaking as we ran down the hall, away from the pulsating wall, away from the shadowy figure. But the house didn't let us go that easily. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the house itself was closing in on us. The walls groaned and creaked, and every step felt like the floor might cave in beneath our feet. We made it to the front door, but it was locked, bolted shut, as though it had never been open in the first place. "Damn it!" Sarah cursed, banging her fists against the door. Her breath was ragged, her face covered in a sheen of sweat. "It's no use. It won't let us go." I was panicking now, my heart racing, as I looked back down the hallway toward the room. The house seemed to be shifting, its layout warping before my eyes. The doors were gone, the windows blacked out. It was like the house itself was changing, adapting, trapping us in its own labyrinth. I couldn't breathe. I felt my chest tighten, my throat closing as panic clawed at me from every angle. But then, through the darkness, I saw something. A figure, tall, thin, just like the one in the room, standing at the end of the hallway, blocking the way. It was the creature. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice like sandpaper on raw skin. "You are mine. Forever." Sarah and I both froze. There was nowhere to run. In that moment, the house seemed to pulse with a sickening rhythm, like the beating of a heart. It was alive, more alive than I could have ever imagined. And it was hungry. I glanced at Sarah, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. There was a silent understanding between us, a shared recognition of the reality we were facing. The house was no longer just a building. It was a living, breathing entity that had claimed us, and it wasn't going to let us leave without taking everything it wanted. But as I stood there, paralyzed by fear, I realized something. The house, the creature, it didn't just want us to be part of it. It needed us. It needs our souls, I thought. The realization crashing into me like a wave. And that was when I knew there was no escape. The only way out was to confront the heart of the house itself, the center of the blood-soaked darkness that had been growing for years. But how? How could we possibly fight something that had existed for so long? Something so powerful? Before I could form any more thoughts, the walls groaned again, louder this time, as if they were alive, as if they were closing in on us. I could feel the heartbeat of the house in my bones, thrumming with each passing second. And then, as if on cue, the lights flickered and everything went black. The darkness pressed against me, suffocating, as if the very air around me had turned into a living thing. I could feel the pulse of the house, its unnatural heartbeat reverberating through my skin, through my bones. Each beat was louder than the last, like the ticking of an ancient clock, counting down to something inevitable. Sarah and I stood there, in the middle of the hallway, staring at the figure that had appeared at the far end. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving toward us, its presence filling the space with a cold, suffocating pressure. The walls groaned as if they too were straining under the weight of the creature's power. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, like I was drowning in it. Every instinct in me screamed for escape. But there was nowhere to run, no windows, no doors. The house had closed itself off, trapping us within its dark embrace. The figure reached the middle of the hallway, and for the first time, I could see it fully. The shadowy figure was tall, too tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally long, its fingers tapering into sharp, claw-like points. Its face, pale and ghostly, was twisted in an expression of cruel amusement, as though it relished in our terror. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice low and gravelly, as if it came from deep within the walls themselves. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to get away, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. My body was betraying me. Fear held me in place, keeping me rooted to the spot like a puppet with its strings pulled taut. I could hear Sarah's breathing, fast and shallow, beside me. I wanted to turn to her, to find some sense of solidarity in this nightmare. But I couldn't bring myself to look away from the creature. "You're too late," the figure continued, its lips curling into a smile that stretched unnaturally wide, exposing sharp, jagged teeth. "This house belongs to me, and now, so do you." Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking with defiance, though her body betrayed her. "No," she whispered, "we won't let you take us." The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering her words. Then it let out a low, almost mocking laugh that sent a chill crawling up my spine. "You cannot define me. You are already mine." In that moment, everything seemed to shudder, the walls groaning and vibrating violently, as if the house itself was reacting to the creature's words. The blood, once merely a stain, seemed to come alive, writhing and crawling along the floor, creeping up the walls, as though the house was alive and feeding on our fear. The very foundation of the building trembled beneath us. and I could feel the floorboards flexing as if they might give way at any moment. "Run!" Sarah shouted, suddenly snapping out of her paralysis. "We need to get to the basement." I didn't know how she knew that, but in my panic, I trusted her. There was no time to question anything. The creature's presence was suffocating, its looming form already beginning to move toward us again. Without another word, Sarah grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the back of the house, her grip like iron. We ran down the hallway, the sound of our footsteps loud in the otherwise deafening silence. The house seemed to stretch before us, its corridors endless, shifting, as if it were trying to confuse us, lead us deeper into its heart. I could feel the walls closing in, the space around us growing tighter, more suffocating. Each step we took was heavier than the last, as though the very air was conspiring against us. The stairs to the basement were up ahead, just out of reach, but the house seemed to mock us with its slow, creeping expansion. The doors, once visible, had vanished. There was no way to open them. I reached for the handle anyway, my hand trembling, but it was locked, the metal cold under my fingertips. "Sarah, we're trapped," I screamed, my voice barely a whisper against the ominous growls that filled the house. She turned to me, her face pale but determined. "We have to find a way. The basement is the only place it can't follow. It's too old, too deeply buried in the house." I didn't understand what she meant, but I didn't have time to ask. I watched as Sarah's eyes scanned the walls frantically, her fingers running over the stones, searching for something, anything. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and I could see the terror beginning to take hold of her. "Over here," she said suddenly, her voice sharp. She rushed toward a crack in the wall near the stairs, her hand pushing against it. It didn't seem to make sense. It was just a small fissure, barely noticeable. But as her hand pressed against the stone, the crack widened, revealing a hidden passage. "How did you?" "Later," Sarah snapped, pulling me forward. "There's no time. Get in." I didn't hesitate. We crawled through the narrow passage, the walls tight around us, the air stifling and damp. I could hear the house groaning, as though it was trying to force its way in after us. The walls seemed to pulse, the blood still moving beneath the surface, crawling through the cracks like some grotesque parasite. We made our way down a long, winding tunnel, the light from a single flickering bulb above us, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The temperature dropped with every step, and I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, pushing against me. It felt like it was trying to swallow us whole. Finally, we reached a small room at the end of the tunnel. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls were covered in what looked like old cracked bloodstains. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it a large, ancient-looking book. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Sarah approached the pedestal cautiously, her fingers trembling as she reached for the book. She turned to me, her eyes filled with something between fear and determination. "This is it," she whispered, "the heart of the house." I looked at the book, my pulse racing. "What do we do with it?" She swallowed hard, her hand hovering over the book. "We destroy it. It's the only way to stop it." To stop him. Before I could ask her what she meant, the room seemed to shudder. A loud crash echoed from the tunnel behind us, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, approaching fast. "Hurry!" Sarah screamed. "He's coming!" I turned to see the passageway behind us darkening, as if the very walls were closing in on us, blocking the way. The creature was here. Without thinking, I grabbed the book from the pedestal. The moment my fingers made contact with it, a jolt of energy shot through me, and I felt the ground beneath me tremble as if the entire house were waking up. No, the creature's voice echoed through the room, a scream of rage that rattled my bones. It was too late. The house was shifting, the walls warping, the blood flowing faster. The book was the key, the final piece of the house's puzzle. We were not just in its heart anymore. We were inside its soul. Story 6. Death in the Moldy Room. I had only been in the house for a few weeks, but already it felt like a part of me was being consumed by something dark, something sinister that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't the creaking floors or the drafty windows. Those could be ignored, chalked up to the age of the house. No, what haunted me was the room. The room that never dried. On the surface, everything about it seemed normal. A small, unassuming space tucked away at the end of the hall, past the bathroom and a storage closet. It was simple, with faded wallpaper, an old wooden bed frame, and a dresser that had seen better days. The sunlight streamed in from the window every morning, its golden rays illuminating the dust particles floating lazily in the air. But when I stepped into that room, something didn't feel right. The first time I noticed the dampness, it was subtle. I was unpacking my things, trying to make the room feel more like home. The air was thick, but I assumed it was just a little humid that day. I chalked it up to the old windows, maybe a slight draft from the outside. But as I unpacked the final box, I noticed something. There, on the floor beside the bed, was a small puddle of water. I froze, staring at it, unsure of what I was seeing. The floor was wooden, not carpeted, and there was no logical explanation for the water. It hadn't rained in days, and yet the floor was wet. I wiped it up with an old towel I found in one of my boxes, thinking it was just a freak accident. Maybe something had spilled during the move. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice a strange odor lingering in the air. Something sickly sweet, mixed with a rotting stench. It was faint at first, just a whisper of something off. But by the time the sun had set, the smell had intensified. I found myself standing in the center of the room, hands on my hips, confused. The window was open, so there was no reason for the air to feel so thick. And yet, the humidity seemed to be growing, like the room was slowly swallowing everything around it. I shut the window, but the dampness didn't go away. In fact, it seemed to get worse. The next morning, the puddle was back, larger than before. And now, the air felt wrong. It wasn't just humidity anymore. The entire room felt alive, as though it was pulsing with some hidden force I couldn't see. My heart raced, and a cold shiver ran down my spine as I stepped into the room, wondering if I was imagining things. But no, the puddle was real, and so was the smell. The rotting flesh. I couldn't leave it there. I had to investigate. I moved the bed, hoping to find an explanation. Maybe a pipe had burst, or the floorboards were rotten and leaking. But as I shifted the heavy mattress, my breath caught in my throat. There, behind the bed, against the wall, was something wrong. It started as a small faint crack in the brick wall. But as I leaned in closer, I saw it, the wall. It was moving, not in a way that would make sense, like an old building shifting with the wind. No, the bricks were alive, or rather, something was inside them, something that was trying to get out. I pulled back, stumbling over the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. Sweat beaded on my forehead, despite the cool air in the room. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the wall. Then, it happened. A tendril, small at first, broke through the crack in the wall. It was thin, almost like hair, but it was growing, pushing its way out of the brick like some grotesque form of vegetation. I gasped, backing away slowly, as the tendril wavered in the air, like it was testing the environment, as if it could sense me. I wanted to scream, to run, but something rooted me to the spot. It wasn't just the wall or the water that felt wrong. It was everything about the room. It was the way it was pulling me in, like it knew I was there, like it was waiting for me. The hair-like tendril grew longer, thicker, and I could see that it wasn't hair at all. It was something else, something far worse. A pulsating, fleshy mass that seemed to glisten in the light. The room felt even more suffocating now. The air was thick with moisture, and the smell of decay was unbearable. I grabbed my phone, dialing the landlord in a panic, but the words stuck in my throat. What was I supposed to say? Hello? Yes, there's something growing in my wall. As I stood there, the tendril seemed to push out further, revealing more of its slimy, wriggling foam. I could feel my stomach churn, my throat tightening as I fought the urge to gag. It wasn't just in the wall anymore. The room itself seemed to be feeding it. And then, the worst part. The sound, a soft, wet, squelching noise came from the wall, and I realized, with a horrified jolt, that the tendril wasn't just growing. It was feeding. It was sucking something from the very room. The walls were alive, drinking in the moisture from the air, from the floor, from the walls. Suddenly, the light flickered. I thought it was a power surge, but as the room darkened, I saw something else. Something much worse. In the corner of the room, just barely visible in the shadows, a figure was standing. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. But then, it stepped into the light. It was tall, impossibly thin, with gray, mottled skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Its face was twisted, hollow, as though it had been drained of all life. But its eyes, those eyes were alive, burning with a malevolent hunger. I stumbled back, my breath shallow and fast. The thing took a step forward, its skeletal hand reaching out toward me, and then the room began to laugh. It was a low, guttural sound coming from the walls, from the very air itself. I could feel it vibrating through my chest, through my bones. It was laughing at me, laughing as if it had all the time in the world, laughing because it knew I was never going to leave. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to enter the room. I couldn't even look at it. The door remained shut, locked, as if that would keep whatever was inside at bay. But I knew better now. I could hear the soft scratching from behind the walls, the wet, slick noises that seemed to be getting louder. Something was growing in that room. Something I couldn't escape. Something that was feeding off my fear. And it wasn't finished yet. I didn't know what I was expecting when I woke up the next day, but it wasn't this. The room was quiet, too quiet. But the oppressive weight that hung in the air hadn't lifted. The dampness still clung to the walls, to the air, to my skin. It felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I stayed in bed for as long as I could, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that kept crawling up my spine. But the moment I stepped foot into the hallway, I could feel it, the faintest echo, like a distant hum coming from the end of the hall. I tried to tell myself that it was just the house settling, but my instincts told me otherwise. I couldn't just leave it there. I couldn't go back to pretending that nothing was wrong. It was like my mind had become a magnet for the unexplainable. Every night, I found myself drawn back to the room, unable to escape the pull. Even when I tried to stay away, it felt as though something inside the walls was calling to me, drawing me closer, enticing me into its dark embrace. I needed answers, or at least I needed to understand why this place felt so wrong. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord again. This time, when the phone rang, I could feel my hands tremble. She picked up after the third ring, her voice cheery, but there was something in it, something that didn't sit right with me. "Hi, how can I help you today?" I hesitated. "There's something. It's the room, the one at the end of the hall." There was a long pause on the other end. "The always damp room," she said, her tone suddenly flat. "How did you—" I've heard about it," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "People who've lived there, they always leave, always. But no one talks about it. It's like—" She trailed off. "Never mind. I'm just the landlord. If you want to leave, I'll help you pack your things." "Leave?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Why would I leave? I just want to know what's going on with that room." "Some things are better left unknown," she said softly, the words heavy, with an emotion I couldn't place. Before I could ask another question, she hung up. I stared at the phone, my heart racing. What had she meant? What had she been about to say? The silence in that room seemed louder now, suffocating. The walls were closing in again. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening, even if it killed me. I made my way to the room, my footsteps hesitant as they echoed down the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, like it had been the night before, and I could feel the dampness pressing against my face as I approached. The smell of rot was heavier now, more insistent, like it was inside me, crawling through my nostrils and into my lungs. I opened the door fully, bracing myself for whatever was inside. The room was still, too still, but when I looked at the wall behind the bed, my stomach lurched. The crack was wider now. The tendril, the thing that had been growing in the wall, had spread. It wasn't just a hair-like thread anymore. It had grown into something far more grotesque. It looked like a finger, long and pale, stretching out from the crack in the brick. And it was moving, slowly, like it was reaching for something, reaching for me. I took a step back, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the thing. It pulsed in the dim light, a slow, rhythmic throb that seemed to echo in my chest. And then I heard it, a voice, soft, faint, a whisper from the wall. It sounded like someone calling my name. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It wasn't even human, but it felt familiar. I tried to run. I spun on my heel, but as I moved toward the door, the air grew colder. The floor beneath me seemed to groan with age, the entire house trembling as if it were alive. I glanced back. The tendril had grown longer, its twisted form now reaching out of the wall and coiling toward the bed. It was impossible. It wasn't possible. But there it was. I grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, stumbling into the hallway. I ran. But the further I went, the heavier the air became. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, pressing against my chest. And then, just as I reached the stairs, I heard the softest sound behind me. A giggle. I spun around. There, standing at the top of the staircase, was a woman. She was dressed in old, faded clothes, her face gaunt and pale. Her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow all light, and her lips curled into a twisted smile. "Did you think you could leave?" she whispered, her voice like a rasp. I froze. "I know what you're doing," she continued, stepping closer. "You think you can escape, but you're already here. You're already a part of it." The smile on her face stretched wider, as if it would split her face in two. I could see something moving behind her, crawling up the walls. Something that wasn't just her shadow. The walls themselves were alive. They were alive, and they were coming for me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The woman took another step forward, and I felt something cold press against my neck. A breath that wasn't mine. "Don't worry," she whispered, her face mere inches from mine. "You'll be home soon." I screamed. I backed away, desperate to escape. But she grabbed my wrist, her grip iron strong. "No," she hissed. "You're mine now." Suddenly, I was no longer in the hallway. The walls had closed in around me, and I was back in the room. The room that never dried. The smell of rot filled my nostrils once again. The pulse of the wall grew louder, like a heartbeat in the dark. The woman's laugh echoed in my ears as she dragged me toward the bed, toward the wriggling tendrils that now filled the room. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry, parched. The room swallowed it, the walls pulsing like they were alive. And then I realized the truth. The room wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just cursed. It was alive. And it was hungry. Hours, or maybe days, later, I awoke. I wasn't in the bed. I wasn't on the floor. I was part of the wall. The pulse of the house was now my own. And I could feel it, calling to the next person, just as it had called to me. The house would never be quiet again. I don't know how long I was trapped inside the wall. Time had become a murky blur, twisting and distorting as the pulse of the house consumed me. I was no longer sure if I was dreaming or awake, if the things I saw were real or just figments of my shattered mind. The air in that room, now suffocatingly dense, seemed to swallow every thought I had, replacing it with a gnawing emptiness that never left. But I wasn't dead, not yet. I was something in between, caught in the web of this house's dark heartbeat, bound by something far older and far darker than I could comprehend. When I first woke, if you could call it waking, everything around me was wet, cold, sticky. The smell of rot was overpowering, like it was seeping from my very skin. I could hear the sound of water dripping, but it wasn't coming from anywhere I could see. It was the walls, the very bricks around me, weeping. The room was alive with dampness, like it was breathing through some hidden pore. The sensation of being smothered, of being watched, never left. I reached out, my fingers brushing against something slick and soft, like flesh. My pulse quickened, and I recoiled. What had I touched? I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog that clouded my mind, but when I opened them, I saw a face. It was not my own. The face was pale, too pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. It was twisted, as if it had been pulled taut by invisible strings, and its mouth hung open in an eerie, silent scream. The face was connected to the wall, and it was the same face I had seen in my visions, in the dark corners of my nightmares. I was no longer in control of my body. The wall, it was drawing me in, pulling me closer, merging me with the darkness. I could feel my skin stretching, my bones cracking, as the pulse of the house surged through me. It was too much, too fast. I couldn't breathe. But then, just as suddenly as the sensation had overwhelmed me, everything stopped. I was back in the room, the one that had begun it all. The room, it had changed. The air was colder now, and the darkness was deeper. The walls seemed to pulse more erratically, as if something inside them was waking up, something far older than the house itself. The tendrils, those things, those horrifying fingers, were gone, but there was something worse. The floor was covered in water. The walls were streaked with something black and viscous, and the room seemed to hum with a quiet, insidious life. I backed away from the wall, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the stagnant air. The entire room felt like it was closing in on me. There was no escape. There had never been escape. And then I heard it, a low whisper. Welcome home. The words were not spoken out loud, but they were as real as if someone was standing right behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, searching the room for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The room was empty, except for the faint outline of a figure standing by the door. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a woman, but not one I recognized. Her skin was a sickly gray, and her eyes were the color of death. She stared at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Her hair was long and black, hanging limp around her face, but it was the way she moved that caught my attention. It was unnatural, fluid, like she was gliding across the floor, her feet never quite touching it. I'm trapped here, aren't I? I whispered, my voice hoarse. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her presence pressing in on me like the walls themselves. She tilted her head, studying me with that cold, calculating gaze. And then, just as I thought I might collapse under the weight of it all, she spoke again. You're more than trapped. You're bound to this place now. You'll never leave. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. There was something in her eyes, something that made my chest tighten with an unbearable sense of fear. You've been chosen, she continued, her voice calm, almost soothing, just like all the others. You'll feed it, just like the rest. I didn't know what she meant by that. I didn't want to know, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. Who? What are you? She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a smile at all. It was a grimace, a twisting of her lips that made her face look even more inhuman. I'm the one who waits, the one who welcomes. I'm the soul who died here, and now I am part of it, just like you will be. My heart hammered in my chest, and I backed away from her, but she was always one step ahead. She was always just within reach, as though the space between us didn't exist. You think you're different, don't you? She said, her voice lowering to a sinister whisper. But you're not. Not really. You're here because it called to you, just like it called to the others. Her words cut through me like ice. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt. The dampness in the air was thicker now, suffocating, as if the room was pressing down on me, making it harder and harder to breathe. "Get out," I gasped, but she didn't move. "Out?" She chuckled softly, the sound grating. "You're already inside. You've been inside for much longer than you realize." Before I could respond, the walls shuddered. The air grew heavy again, thick with something ancient, something alive. I turned to face the crack in the wall, the place where the tendrils had been growing. But now, there was something worse. The wall itself had begun to shift. I could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Something alive, something that was stirring. It was the house. The walls were breathing. "It's coming," she whispered, her voice a thin thread of dread. "It's always coming." I backed away, the hairs on my neck standing on end as I tried to move toward the door. But my feet wouldn't budge. The floor felt sticky, as though it was trying to hold me in place. I tugged at my shoes, trying to free myself from whatever invisible force was binding me. But it wasn't the floor, it was the walls. The walls had claimed me. I could feel them now, the weight of them pressing in on me from every side, the suffocating pulse of the house wrapping around me. It was too late to run. It was too late to escape. I was already a part of it. As the darkness closed in around me, I realized one terrible truth. There would be no end to this. I was part of the house now, part of the thing that lurked behind the walls, growing, feeding, wait for its next victim. I had become one of them, and I would never leave. It was dark now, not just the room, but everything. The kind of dark that presses against your chest, suffocating every breath, wrapping your limbs in invisible chains. I had been trapped in the house for what felt like an eternity, but I had no idea how long it had truly been. Time had become as fluid as the ever-wet walls, and I could no longer separate the past from the present. I could hear the house moving around me, breathing, groaning like an old man trapped in the grip of something much worse than age. The room had changed again, still damp, still oppressive. But now, there were new things growing, things that weren't there before. It was as if the house itself was evolving, becoming something darker, something more sinister with each passing moment. The woman, the one I had met in the hallway, the one whose smile, stretched like a grotesque mask, hadn't left me. She lingered at the edges of my vision, a shadow in the corner of my eye. Her laughter, high and hollow, echoed through the space, reverberating in the walls, in my head. "You're not just trapped here," she had whispered when I had tried to flee the first time. "You're part of it now, a piece of the house. You can't leave because you are the house." I had tried to move. I had tried to escape the suffocating pull of this cursed place. But every time I made a move toward the door, the walls seemed to close in. The floor, once solid beneath my feet, now felt like it was shifting, like it was alive, responding to every step I took. The house was toying with me, twisting me into its own shape, folding me into its dark corners where light could never reach. It had been hours, or maybe days, since I had last seen the woman, but I knew she was still here, watching me from the shadows. I could feel her eyes on me, even when I didn't look. The thing about fear is that it starts to feel familiar after a while. The first few days, I had been afraid of the dark, of the growing presence in the walls. But now I was afraid of myself. Because there was a part of me, the part that had once been human, that had started to fade. The longer I stayed here, the more I became like the house, like the walls, the darkness. I could feel it creeping into my thoughts, wrapping around my mind, like the wetness in the room. I didn't know if I was losing myself or becoming something else entirely. It was then that I noticed something new in the room, something that hadn't been there before. The crack in the wall was growing wider, but it wasn't just the crack. There was a shape inside the wall, something that was slowly taking form, pressing against the bricks from the other side, trying to push its way through. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to shrink with each step I took, the walls growing closer, their dampness clinging to me like a second skin. The shape in the wall had taken on more definition now. It was a face that was half-formed, half-rotted. The skin was stretched thin, the eyes hollow and staring. And the mouth was frozen in a scream that was cut short by the walls that held it captive. I stepped back, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The face wasn't just an image. It was real. It was alive. And it was reaching for me. I could feel the room pulsing again, its heartbeat syncing with mine, thumping louder in my chest. The house was calling to me, calling me to become part of it, to surrender. And just when I thought I couldn't take any more, when the darkness was about to swallow me whole, I heard the voice again. Help. Me. It was faint, so faint I almost thought I had imagined it. But no, it was real. Someone was in the wall. Someone was trapped. I could feel their pain, their desperation crawling under my skin. Help me. Please. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. The voice, no, the presence, was coming from the wall. It was begging me to help it escape. And then, the face moved. It wasn't just an image anymore. The face was shifting, its eyes blinking, its mouth opening and closing, as if it were trying to speak. The scream that had been trapped in the wall was now leaking out, like water seeping through cracks in a dam. I had to do something, anything. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, an old metal lamp that had been sitting on the dresser for as long as I could remember. And I swung it at the wall. The metal clang echoed through the room, and for a moment, I thought it might have worked. But then, the wall cracked open wider, and the face in the wall smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief. It wasn't even a smile of comfort. No, it was the kind of smile you make when you've just found your next victim. And the moment it smiled, the room seemed to collapse in on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The air became thick with something foul, something rotten. The walls weren't just closing in. They were pressing through me, through my chest, through my bones. I was becoming a part of the house, a part of the thing behind the walls. But just as I thought I would lose myself completely, I heard it again. Help. Me. This time, the voice was stronger. It wasn't coming from the wall anymore. It was coming from the floor beneath me. I looked down. There, beneath the wet, shifting floorboards, was another face. This one was younger, a woman, her eyes wide with fear. She was trapped in the floor, her hands pressed against the wood, trying to claw her way out. Help me. Please. I could feel her desperation, her pain, and for the first time, I felt the urge to help, to save her, to save myself. But I knew the truth. There was no saving anyone in this house. The house had claimed me. It had claimed her. It had claimed all of us. And we were nothing more than whispers in the walls, shadows in the dark. I had become a part of it. I had become part of the soul of the house. And the house was alive. And it was hungry